pledge allegiance to the flag
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item on the agenda is under the City Attorney's Report. Mr. Davidson.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a recommendation for closure to discuss personnel, litigation, and real estate.
Thank you, Mr.
What's the deal? Is it muted? Was it on? Okay.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Tyser. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Judy. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. For the record, Councilmember Palermo hadn't joined us yet. The next item is under the mayor's report with the approval of a design review board appointment, Mr. Matthew Brady. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Wilsey. Do I have a second? Second. Second by Councilmember Palermo. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. And I would like to thank Mr. Brady for his willingness to come forward and volunteer his time for the city of Roswell. It's very much appreciated. As you all are very well aware, our boards and commissions do a great deal of work for the city and contribute a great deal. So I thank them all for their contributions to the city and their their willingness to give back. And welcome, Matthew Brady. The next item on the agenda is a proclamation for National Drinking Water Week. Whereas, for more than 40 years, the American Water Works Association and its members have celebrated Drinking Water Week, a unique opportunity for both water professionals and the communities they serve to recognize the essential and vital role water plays in our daily lives. And whereas water is a basic and essential need of every living thing and our most valuable natural resource. And whereas only tap water delivers public health protection, fire protection, support for our economy, and the quality of life we enjoy. And whereas the citizens of Roswell should have a safe and dependable supply of water now and in the future, as we are all stewards of the water infrastructure upon which future generations depend. And whereas National Drinking Water Week recognizes the dedicated water professionals in our city who ensure the success of providing clean, safe, and reliable drinking water to our community and the protection and proper management of our water resources. And whereas the City of Roswell will provide live online learning opportunities and digital resources throughout National Drinking Water Week to engage the community in water education, appreciation, and conservation practices. Now therefore I, Lori Henry, Mayor of the City of Roswell, do hereby proclaim the week of May 2nd through the 8th of 2021 as National Drinking Water Week in the City of Roswell, and ask that all citizens help protect our source waters from pollution, to practice water conservation, and to recognize and participate in this national event. Mr. Skalski, are you? We would love to have a picture. I saw you and I think a couple of your staff members, but we would love to present this to you and have a picture with you. But also, could you tell us a little bit about what we've got going on?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Let me start by thanking our drinking water staff. They've been phenomenal throughout the pandemic. Chris Boyd has been out sick quite a bit the last week or two. He's still been literally Zooming it in from home, and they continue to do that. And thank you all for the support, both from the community and the council, for our program. We're a little thin on water staff here tonight.
All right, make sure we can see Councilmember Hall. Just excellent. Okay. All right. Thank you.
And I would like to again thank our Environmental and Public Works Department for always delivering great service, whether it's garbage or water. And we certainly do appreciate it because you all really get the work done. We never need to worry about those services to our citizens. The next item on the agenda is a presentation by Stantec Downtown Roswell Parking Assessment. If you all would come forward, please.
Good evening. My name's Tom Smith, and I'm Vice Chairman of the Roswell Downtown Development Authority. For everyone's benefit, I want to very briefly summarize a bit of history regarding Stantec's parking assessment, and in a moment I'll introduce Joel Mann, who will make this evening's presentation. In March of 2020, the Mayor and City Council passed a resolution asking the DDA to conduct a professional parking assessment of the downtown Canton Street area and to determine the best method to improve downtown parking and to, quote, increase such parking to benefit both local businesses and Roswell citizens. Trent Perry, who was then chairman of the DDA, asked me to lead a 3-person team to conduct the parking assessment. Last summer, the DDA approved a scope for the assessment, and we sent the scope to 6 different qualified firms, all of whom have conducted a number of parking studies in the past. We got 5 proposals and interviewed each of those 5, and we picked Stantec. Stantec is a multinational, diversified firm engaged in engineering and planning services, and Stantec domestically has done over 100 parking studies in the U.S., and Joel in particular has conducted studies for Atlanta, Alpharetta, Norcross, Savannah, and Chattanooga. And in conducting the assessment, as you'll see, Stantec looked at a lot of data, analyzed parking supply and demand, conducted on-site usage counts on a Thursday and Saturday evening, conducted over a dozen stakeholder interviews, which included folks from Roswell, Inc., Visit Roswell, restaurant and retail operators on Canton Street, landowners, developers, and city staff. We also conducted a survey of Canton Street patrons and got about 500 responses, which was very good. This was obviously a challenging time to conduct a parking study, but Stantec made adjustments to account for COVID, which Joel will describe. So Joel made the presentation, which you're about to see, on April 14th to the DDA, and the DDA voted to accept Stantec's parking assessment. I mentioned that we were a 3-person team, and I'd like to thank a couple of other DDA members, Michael Thompson and David White. They both contributed significant time and effort to the study, and because they're both volunteers, their efforts are all the more appreciated. And on behalf of the DDA, I'd like to thank the mayor and the city council for giving us this opportunity, and we're looking forward to other opportunities to work with and partner with the city. So before we get started, Joel gets started, I'd ask that you please, if you can, hold questions to the end so Joel can work his way through the presentation. The pages are numbered, so if a question pops up, make a note of the page number, and we can refer back to it. Joel is a principal with Stantec with 16 years experience in transportation planning. He personally worked on the studies I mentioned earlier, and I'm sure you'll appreciate his presentation.
Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Mayor and Council. As Tom mentioned, this is a study that delved into a lot of issues. The presentation is complex. We like to think it's thorough as well, but I'll try to move through quickly so that we can save enough time for questions afterward. And apologies in advance if I kind of rush through things that are rather complex. I hope we can jump back to those because there is a lot to get through. And as I familiarize myself with the technology here, can everyone hear me okay? There we go. And can you hear me better now? Great. So I want to give you a quick overview of the study's objectives and purpose. Tom mentioned, and the council resolved some specific mandates for this study or interest that you had in doing it. Our reason for doing this was not about revenue. It was not about telling the city that more parking needs to be built. It was simply trying to make parking easier to use and more available for customers in downtown. And that's kind of the central message of all of it. Any ideas and recommendations that have come from that in the study are coming with that purpose in mind. So I want to, kind of keep coming back to that as the cornerstone of the study. This was about availability. This was about finding a legible system that everybody feels comfortable using. And the ways that you get there, the management approaches or other techniques that you can use to get there, are all in service of that. The study area that we looked at was pretty large. This extended from Woodstock Street to the north down to Hill Street, and generally along the Canton Street corridor, but it kind of, looked at the east side of Route 9 as well. There's also a core area that we focused on, and I'm drawing that distinction now because later in the presentation, we'll jump to that area for some specific discussion about it. But overall, we looked at about 3,000 parking spaces in this area. When you start breaking those down in terms of who owns them, who manages them, who can use them, you see some interesting trends that start to emerge. About 30% of that parking is what we would call public. That doesn't mean the city owns it necessarily, it just means this is parking for anyone to use. There's no restriction on it. The balance of that, the other 70%, is what we're calling restricted. It's for customers of a business only. It's for some specific set of users. But when you peel back layers from that, it's not even that simple. There are different permissions around the restricted parking, and some restricted parking shares between a couple of businesses. Some parking is made available through lease arrangements that the city has led with some private owners and functions as public parking, but only for part of the day. So you start adding all of this up, and you can see quickly that it's a pretty complex system. For only 3,000 spaces, you've got several different ways that it's priced, that it's made available, that it's managed. And just kind of stepping back to the original purpose of this, right, which was about an easy system, availability in the parking system. Right off the bat, you start to see that for somebody not familiar here, this could be challenging. And you can see where there could be some perception of not enough parking, or parking's not easy or intuitive. And as we kind of work through each of these different layers or ways of looking at it, you can see that it is not only complex, it's also fragmented. There's over 120 parking lots when you break it down, some very small, some very large, like the one right outside of City Hall. But that's spreading out the inventory over a lot of little pieces. So think of that from the user perspective as well. That's one more layer in the mix where, especially somebody not familiar with downtown, they're coming in and they're trying to navigate this all of a sudden. There's also some of the parking that has a price, and I'll point out that that's a significant kind of barrier to get through for smaller downtowns. We worked on a study in Alpharetta where they didn't have any priced parking, and city and stakeholders were, understandably concerned. What's that going to do? How's that going to change business? Roswell's sort of past that threshold, and you're charging for some of the parking. Some of that is the street spaces that the city owns. Some of that is privately managed, but it's getting used. So you're kind of over that hurdle, if you will. But the pricing system of the parking isn't completely clear and straightforward either. There's some complexity to that as well. Some private lots that charge for parking charge a couple of different rates if there's a special event. There's some valet parking services, especially around restaurants. Some of it charges, some of it doesn't. So this theme of complexity that I keep coming back to, we kind of laid it out in terms of a matrix, a way of looking at all the price and permission combinations. And when you take the inventory, our 2,900 spaces, and distribute that out over all those different combinations, it starts to become clear we've got a lot going on here, and people are trying to figure this out and figure out where's the right parking for me. And if that's not immediately apparent to a user, especially somebody not familiar with downtown coming in, that's where you start getting these complaints. That's where the perceptions of a shortage come in. Now, in a minute, I'm going to start jumping into the actual data collection that we did just to see how much the parking is being used. because you need to move past those anecdotes and ground these in actual numbers and actual facts, which is a big part of what our study did. But this is happening during a time when downtown is changing, and for the better, we'd say. You've got development coming in, you've got more and more interest in this downtown throughout the Atlanta region and beyond. But there isn't a single place where all the information on how you park is clearly organized. The city maintains some parking information on the city website. There's a variety of other maps and resources given out, but it's not fully comprehensive yet. It's not all easy to get to or kind of read your way through. There's some wayfinding, but it isn't fully consistent. And this is sort of the other end of the experience. When the user gets here, what does he or she encounter and how does it work for them? We're also looking at, just practically speaking, along downtown, right, south to north. The map you see on the slide here takes the intersection of Canton and Norcross streets and shows how far you could walk 5 minutes from that. 5 minutes is a pretty good walk, and most people would prefer to be closer to their destination than that. But even those hardy souls willing to do that and park farther away, you can't even get to all of the parking in downtown. So, this is also suggesting that we might need more parking in different places, but it needs to be woven together and understood through a signage or information system. Tom mentioned in his introduction that we did a survey. We did a survey as part of a study, got 500 responses for a survey being open for just 2 weeks right before the holidays. That's pretty good. That's a pretty high response rate. But we learned some things from that study that we're telling around this issue of user convenience and comfort and legibility. 3/4 of people who come here spend between 1 and 3 hours. So this isn't just quick stops. I want to, get in and get out for something really simple. People want to come and spend time, and sometimes that's even more than a restaurant meal or one shopping experience. They want to go to many other places, and about the same number of people confirm that's the case. 72% want to park once and walk and enjoy what downtown has to offer. But interestingly, a shocking 84% of the survey responses said, we don't try to read up and see where it is. We just get there and try looking for parking around. So think of that. Think of the different ways that parking's organized, and it kind of starts to make sense that a lot of people are circling around. It's not easy for them. They're just sort of trying their luck. And they feel like there's sometimes not adequate information. This is straight from the survey, but over half of the people said, we don't feel like that's really, good enough to guide us. So a big part of what the study explored was who's actually parking, so that we can start, marrying some numbers to survey responses. And we went out and counted. Tom noted earlier that we made some adjustments for the COVID-19 pandemic. What we typically do in these studies is count the number of people parked in spaces, so that we can see of the parking that's there, how much of it's being used. We did this at several different times. We tried to track restaurant activity and the kind of peak periods around downtown's businesses. And we do this typically by just going out and counting. We augmented it this time around because we were all concerned that we weren't going to get full economic performance reflected in this. So we worked closely with Roswell Inc. and Visit Roswell on some kind of market study data that they regularly collect, so that we could track an actual number of people who came into downtown this time in 2019 versus when we did this counting in autumn of 2020. So we had an adjustment factor. We tried to play this very safe and emulate full economic conditions as much as possible. But even then, what happens, if you can see in the bar graph here, not all the parking is being used. These maps, we have a series of these that we have in the written report document for this as well. They show how the parking's being used by this color coding system, where as you get into oranges and reds, it fills up. And right in that core district that we talked about earlier, along the southern part of Canton Street, parking's all pretty full. But then you get further beyond that, and it isn't. The City Hall lot, notably, is very lightly used at some of the busiest times. And, this is not just restaurants driving this. This is other kinds of business that drive parking demand. But then some businesses will be closed in the evening. They have parking that's theirs. That's not being used. So jumping back to this map really quickly, you can kind of see that imbalance start to shape up. That demand is really focused in geography and periods of time, but then you'll have parking next to it that isn't serving that demand because of restrictions on it or various permissions. So we looked at Saturday as well, and this is actually diving down into that core district. So 2,900 spaces in the full district. That core that we talked about is really just over 800, so that's a lot more focused around the Canton, Norcross, Magnolia area. But in that core, you get to Saturday evening and we're pretty close to full. You only have 100 spaces left out of those 800. That's what we consider functionally full in our kind of planning methodology, because you've got some space, but not a lot to accommodate new users. In fact, 85% is sort of the sweet spot number we use for a fully utilized parking facility, because there's enough, wiggle room to let, a new customer arrive or one leave. So what does all that mean? What are the takeaways here? It's clear that people want to come to places where they want to be. That's intuitive, but there could be more parking that's readily available for the public to use. There's a lot of it that's in restrictions, that we need to find a way to make more available. And having that in more locations could benefit as well, because that demand isn't just at the South Canton Street corridor. There's demand drivers all throughout downtown, especially with restaurants and other evening uses. But that, it doesn't seem like people are aware of some of the options that are there. So we counted East Alley, for instance, that has some public parking, and you have parking lots right next to it that are full and spaces available there. That might be kind of a different parking experience for some customers, and they may not know that that's fully available. But the price is not keeping people away either. There's nothing to be afraid of with that, because parking charging was completely full. Parking that wasn't charging sometimes wasn't full. So there's not a clear price affecting demand kind of relationship. So the next part of what we did is to think about those numbers that we counted today, in current conditions, and think about what happens with downtown as downtown continues to grow. And we worked with the DDA closely on development proposals that they have been reviewing throughout the end of the last year and the first part of this one. So the next several slides that I'm showing, this series of maps or kind of graph diagrams, is a way of depicting how parking demand works. This is what we call our modeled demand or estimated demand. So this is driven from national research, and we're taking kind of documented surveillance of different land uses and how parking is generated over time, and bringing all that together. I can never explain that succinctly, so bear with me and we can clarify that in questions if we need to. But basically what this is telling you is, when are people using parking for different land uses? And as you add up the sum of many different land uses that you have in a downtown, how does it kind of ebb and flow throughout the day? What this lets you do is measure when you're at your absolute busiest. So people don't come and use parking 24 hours, 7 days a week because you built it for that land use. They use it when the business is open. This is not looking at who owns what parking. This is simply kind of measuring demand. But what we do is compare that back to what we counted. So at our busiest time, based on the restaurants we have, the retail space, offices, other land uses in downtown's mix, we would expect that we need about 1,500 parking spaces to serve that demand in the total area. What we actually counted was less. There's probably, some COVID factor here. We tried to use this adjustment methodology, but maybe more people would have been coming. So that could be, that we could look at different ways. But what I think is really significant to understand as you start getting into this further is that specific kinds of parking demand around something like restaurants or around something like retail businesses may only have certain parking that they can use. And when you look at restaurants as one example, because that's the biggest driver of downtown demand, at the busiest time, you'd expect to need over 1,200. That's most of the downtown supply during that time. And with a mix of what they own and what's public and what's shared, they're kind of making it work, but it's through some very careful methods. Some of the parking that's included in this supply that we consider public, like the lot that the city leases from the Hagen property, the Green Street lot, those are all on leases that have end dates. Those are all privately owned pieces of property that the owner might decide to do something with later. It starts to point to kind of a precarious, and delicate balance right now, that you're kind of making it work, but you're dependent on some rather fragile conditions. And when you think back to this idea of this complexity matrix, and the user and what they're doing to navigate it, it can be challenging. It makes sense why people say, well, we don't have enough parking. The maps show that there's actually a lot there, but when you get down to who can use it, where it is, how it's made available, when it's made available, it starts to make sense that some people might get frustrated with this. They see the end of the functional system right in front of them, and they can't get a space when they want one. So drilling back down to that smaller core area and the 800 spaces that are there, we did the same thing. We mapped out what the demand would look like and compared that to what we counted, and it's really pretty close in this case. We would expect about 700 spaces. We counted just under 700 there, and that's very tight. That's only about 125 until you're exhausting your supply fully. And so one thing I want you to pay attention to with this is this little gap. If you can see the orange bar, your total supply of spaces is the 825. What we actually went out and counted is 698. So the difference of those two, 127, this is what you have left to work with, right? This is what's open in the downtown supply. Now I mentioned that we looked at a couple of development proposals. We looked at the West Alley proposal over at the Wells Fargo site and the Choice Gateway Hotel proposal as well. And basically took this kind of demand estimating and added those into it to see what would this do, how would this drive parking demand further, but also they've both proposed parking supply that could add to the overall mix. How does that start to balance out? So what happens, this is West Alley as the first example. They're adding a lot more parking. It's a net addition of about 330 spaces. They're building on some parking that's there on the site, and they're building more back. So the net gain is positive. But what I want to point out that's critical about that development is that it's proposing land uses that are active during the day, and it's meeting the UDC requirements to build parking for those uses. Then those businesses close by 6 p.m. or whatever, and that parking may not be used. So in addition to a portion of their parking that's supposed to be public, made available to the city, there's actually a lot of their parking that is, restricted or private that may not actually be used, that might open up opportunities for arrangements like what you have with the Methodist Church or with the Green Street lot, where you could part-time, maybe lease some of that out. And the gap, what you now have to work with, has gone from 127 to almost 370. So, you've just added that much more supply, because at your busiest time, if you can, for the council members and mayor, I'm pointing to the summit of that mountain there. The busiest time, driven by restaurants, you're seeing the daytime uses start to close and the demand fall off there. So you're left with a lot you can work with. The other proposal we looked at was the Choice Gateway development. It's just a smaller proposal to begin with, proposing fewer hotel rooms. It needs fewer parking spaces. But what that's doing, it's increasing the gap as well, just not by as much. And it doesn't have that mix of uses, including some daytime functioning uses, that would add parking supply that could be leveraged for something later. So it's a smaller footprint of adding parking, and it doesn't have the same kind of mix. But what's happening in either case is that you're adding some parking into the public supply with this. Notice that the first time we looked at this, our current parking today, we have 246 public spaces in that core. You add 100 to that from West Alley, you add 50 to that from Choice Gateway. Both of those are helping, because this supply bar, the gray bar on the left that's stacked up, this is where people are having to navigate which parking they use when they're getting into downtown. And the more of it you have that is public, or what we have termed virtual public in this study, meaning nobody has to know that it's privately owned and the city's leasing it, they just know they can use it. The more of this you have, and the more that number matches what your demand is, the easier it is for people to use. People can get to downtown and say, I know where to go park, and there's going to be parking available, and it's not, this is somebody else's, or I'm going to get towed from being here. So what that means for recommendations, and I have failed to keep this brief, I'm sorry, but I'm wrapping up now, is that we have some, let's first establish some kind of baseline understanding and maybe dispel some myths here. What we feel is certain from this is that we need more publicly available parking. Does that mean the city has to go build it? Does that mean any particular thing for how you get it? No, we need probably a multi-pronged approach to that. But we have too much parking that's tied up right now in a specific restricted use that can't serve a broader function for what downtown's users want the parking to do. And that has to be distributed throughout. That, the idea of one big location, say it's a parking garage, may not be the right fit either, because people want to be, in different locations throughout downtown, and they want to move around downtown. That's key. So having this parking in multiple locations gives people more choices. And, that Green Street model is good and has worked, but leases are about to run out. Doing this on kind of a short term might not work. There might need to be a bigger, push to that. And, making them more long-term or making them more permanent could help to add to that supply. What we'll also say as some kind of baseline things we want to establish is that, and not everyone's going to want to hear this, but, one particular land use, restaurants, retail, whatever it is, it probably isn't the reason the city should get involved and try to work on adding more parking. You need to do this for all of the land uses in downtown, and you need to find ways to strategically, kind of build and get this parking used throughout the day. So we spoke to different stakeholders who felt strongly that, city should be adding more parking, but it's our estimation that there needs to be some kind of strategic thought about where we add it and for whom, and let's make sure that this is a good investment for our downtown. We're not over-investing, we are maximizing what we can get out of it. And then I'll call it kind of myth busting. Parking shouldn't have to be free. I think that's often an opinion in downtowns that if we charge for parking, we're gonna drive the business out. I don't think that's true, and it's been proven that parking is priced in downtown Roswell and it's getting used because we went out and counted it. So parking pricing shouldn't be treated as, a revenue source. It's there to manage high demand. You charge prices because everybody wants to be there. But the flip side is that you leave some parking that doesn't have prices, that's less in demand, and people who want to make choices based on price and what they spend have the choices to make. I hate to say it because you've got this big, beautiful parking lot here that could do so much to help downtown, but it's probably just not going to be viewed as that silver bullet in the long run. It didn't have strong support from stakeholders. I am a transportation planner. I do a lot of street design and safety work, so I'm used to walking. And I could even see myself that this is probably just a bridge too far for a lot of users, especially the occasional ones. So let's keep trying to engage the City Hall property, at least at night, to serve those uses. But it probably can't be the answer to all the problems, now or in the future. And, we've got to think about this probably pretty soon. Like I mentioned, it's a precarious balance right now, and we can't rely on, squeezing more efficiency out of this kind of a system for too much longer. It's worth starting to kind of look at the next steps. So what are those? We have proposed two kind of principal paths that you could follow, and we actually recommend that you try to do a little bit of both. But one of them is a management-based approach, that the Hagen property, the Green Street property, the United Methodist Church, using that kind of an approach and trying to bring more parking into the public supply through this virtual parking option, be working on that, but at the same time be working on, proactively understanding what's out there, helping to encourage agreements for more sharing, just so that more of the supply throughout downtown becomes publicly available and easier to use. And in doing this, that you need to budget for it. It's not an opportunity thing anymore to, go after one or two lots here or there, or wait for them to come to you and offer something to the city. There needs to be some standard pricing set for what you'll offer to property owners if you lease it out. There needs to be kind of an annual target for what you hit. So definitely some work to do on the city side with that approach. But what it looks like, it's basically taking what you have and just repurposing that or making that available to people differently. And you have a working, established model for it with this contract agreement template. You don't have to reinvent the wheel here. One thing we did hear, though, and I want to bring it up from the survey, is that continuing to just improve and enhance parking is part of it as well. it's not a, you know, huge majority, but I would say it's a significant number of people who say, you know, we want to see, we're willing to walk a little bit, we just want these to feel a bit nicer and safer, so don't lose sight of that. The other path that we're recommending that you can follow is more focused on building new supply, but we're not saying that that should be the city building a garage or going out and building new parking. We're saying that this needs to be more parking added in some way, and that you should think about that strategically, especially with development. And I think both of the development proposals we reviewed offer a good analog for this kind of model moving forward. You're getting more parking in downtown, period. That's what everyone needs. It needs to be public and available. You're also getting development that, in those two examples, use that parking differently. And in our assessment, one of those development proposals is using it very efficiently because it's all throughout the day. It can flex over from a daytime reserved use into more of a kind of virtual public open use in the evenings, and it's the same supply being used more efficiently. What that means for the city and what we're recommending is that you be proactive and strategic about planning for this. You know, that could be something like a downtown master plan that identifies sites and says these are places where we want to focus on letting this happen or guiding this to happen in the future. You don't know what the proposals will look like. You don't know what, you know, the developers will want to do, but you can identify that we in principle want to do this. We want to have more of that kind of model where we are working with the developers to make sure that we're getting something back for the city. And we want to, you know, be proactive about that so that we can kind of shape this and determine where it's going and that it fits downtown the way we want it to, and not just kind of letting the market determine that. So it takes more time that way. There's a lot more coordination. But what you probably get as a benefit is that you get more parking in a smaller number of increments. And what that means, basically, the colors on this aren't showing up that well, but there's some orange parking that the city would own. There's some magenta parking that's private, and that's supporting development that's next to it in this model. So, you know, what if you built 500 spaces, just to drive this point home? If the city decided we're going to go build a garage, 500 spaces today, how does that work? And let's take the restaurant example again. At 7 p.m., which is their peak period, if you did that, you'd have about the same number of spaces as what we would estimate restaurant demand to be. You're good, right? Everything's public. Everyone feels like they've got easy parking they can get to. But start stepping back to different points of the day. That's their peak. Outside of their peak, you have, you know, in the middle of the day, as many as 600 spaces in this larger pool of public supply that might not be getting used. That's all of the garage you just built plus some change. And then even earlier in the day, you might even have over 1,000 spaces not being used. So this is why we emphasize in that second path to work on ways to try to combine this with development. Invest the right amount in downtown. Downtown needs the parking. We can see that. And it needs that public-facing side of the parking to bring visitors in. But you know, don't over-invest in it either. And you know, it's our concern that if you just decided we're going to go out and start building parking today, and there isn't that kind of strategic plan for how it gets programmed and used, you'd end up with a lot of these, you know, kind of oversupplies at different times, which is not what you want either. So what we think is the you know, the Goldilocks approach, if you will, is be working on both of these. You can be replicating that virtual public model through the lease agreements starting now, and you can be taking the next few years to start planning for what some of these strategic development opportunities look like, and working with the DDA to help, you know, position those and bring the development market in for them. So, you know, set some numeric goals around it, but primarily be focused on the short stuff in the short term, or the small stuff in the short term, but, you know, be looking at some of these bigger opportunities as well to leverage them for the city's benefit. There's also some general management strategies we've recommended about, you know, just monitoring regularly and making sure that you're, you know, introducing things like price or time limits when the demand is high enough, not before. But that means, you know, coming back and doing this kind of a refresh on the parking counts at least once a year. Definitely once COVID's finished, you want to kind of stabilize that, just so that you're making good decisions off of fresh data over time. So again, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been a pleasure to work with the city and the DDA on it. I know that was an awful lot of information, so I welcome any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the DDA for taking on this task and guiding it through this process. Does council have any questions? Councilmember Palermo.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor Henry. So thank you for a great presentation. Definitely appreciate you sharing the expertise and the research, and thank you to the DDA for bringing in the expert and being a great partner in this process. So a couple questions I have, and keep in mind what I appreciate about you bringing your expertise is I certainly want to make sure that I approach this with no preconceived notions, and definitely really appreciate having an expert because it's so easy for everyone up here, everyone in the city, business, consumer, anything, to have their preconceived notions, but it's so important to have the data, the expert, et cetera. So I guess a couple questions I have just to make sure I'm clear on some things. So your point was that from a parking utilization standpoint, because of all of the basically restricted parking, you know, someone's private property that's not being used after hours, they close at 6 p.m., that represents 57% of the parking spots available. Is that what the 57% available meant?
Let me go back.
It was on slide 57.
That 57%, I off the top of my head want to say that's just what's open. That's available regardless of ownership or anything.
But so that includes both restricted and unrestricted?
That's correct.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. And then, so I guess another question, because again, wanting to make sure not to have any preconceived notions. A thought I had in the past, I had thought you were basically saying would never work, which you're the expert, not me. But then when I heard you more, I feel like I perhaps misunderstood. So when you said basically that the model that we have with, for example, the Green Street lot, you mentioned, you know, it's probably not going to work to keep replicating this, and mentioning later on that it's not going to satisfy demand in the long term. So basically, if I understand correctly, though, your concern is just the long-term aspect, because what I heard elsewhere is actually we should be replicating it, and we should be doing more of it, if I understood correctly. And the reason I say that is because you mentioned with really the approach of one, and I really love what you have actually on slide 79, because when this council authorized Mr. Davidson to go to specific lots, really kind of my, you know, I think it's worked out well. That being said, my thought process is, why aren't we just having our policy and making it completely transparent to the entire downtown that, hey, if anybody, you know, has these spots and available, you know, basically here's our policy, here's our price, here's how we protect you, and I'd love to have a lot more free parking signs or paid, but whatever the recommendation is, but a lot more public parking signs. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm understanding correctly, that is one of the two strategies that you're saying?
Yes. Let me thank you, Councilmember. That's a great question, and let me clarify on that point. This slide, I don't have the number on these for some reason, but this is feasible and not feasible, the yeses. Just to clarify, short-term leases, you know, doing this that way on like a 2 or 3 year, a month-to-month kind of arrangement, we're concerned that if any one of those changes,
sure,
it's a very tender apple cart balance right now that gets upset. So continuing to do that on kind of an opportunity basis and being rather, you know, let's just look at this for a little bit of time, kind of hedging bets, you know, you'll have to keep doing a lot of that. Yeah. You can replicate that model to more spaces, but I think the significant thing is you need a sense of permanence that this is around, you know, for the long haul. Mm-hmm. So part of that might be, I love the idea of, you know, just an open kind of, you know, parking fair, if you will, for the property owners to let people, hey, you know, if you're interested, we are looking at gauging who wants to do this. I think part of that should be a conversation of options, you know, what they're looking to do. And you would make it clear to them that, you know, we're probably thinking more like 3 to 5 year leases, that sort of thing. And anyone who's probably looking to do something with it will see that, that's not for me. Sure. They might want to talk to the city and say, could you do a 1.5 years and I'll cut a rate or something like that. But I think the approach of the city getting behind this and saying, we're going to treat this as a policy, you wouldn't be alone in doing it. There are plenty of other downtowns that take that approach. And I think some, you know, kind of due diligence work. We didn't have enough information to get into that here on land values, current assessments, what people charge for rent, all that. We didn't really do a market study, but you'd want to standardize that somewhat and be able to offer a fair price to people. But yes, that model, if reinforced and given enough policy kind of push, from this council, I think will help in the short term because it's there, it exists. You don't have to go build it.
Excellent. No, thank you for answering that. And again, I'd love to work with the DDA, with you, well, obviously, crucially, with this council, but on really just replicating it. We've already proven that the city's willing to pay for some of these lots, and why not just have a transparent process that opens us up to more of that restricted parking that's not being used. So that was my question related to strategy approach 1. And then I guess my question that I believe is related to strategy approach number 2 is I guess, is there anywhere, I think you kind of described this, but I want to get a little more specific to make sure I'm understanding correctly, and if this is done at all, where let's say we have a developer coming in and they're just already planning on, they're requesting, doing X, and they're required to build 100 spots. Is there anything where just you have a policy that says if you build, any spots you build in addition to what you're required, if the city is able to get access to those best spots being publicly available or something like that, then here's just the fee that the city pays. Well, I don't know if it's legal to credit impact fees towards parking, or is that something you ever see? And I guess I'd be curious, Mr. Davidson, is that something that's legal or not?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
It's a great question, but it gets into many different avenues. I'll try to break that down a little bit if that's okay. So, 1, it is a best practice to work with development where if the city sees a potential opportunity, and this is an area where you've got demand, which you've got the maps, you can see that now, to say, we'd like to figure out a way to get more than what you have to provide, what the UDC provides, or critically, this is another factor in it, what capital markets are expecting you to provide, because that's always a part of it too. But that's a best practice, simply to say that and say we want to try to work with you on it. The ways you get to that are probably less clear, and I think you probably have many ways to get to that. Something like a tax abatement, something like you decide we want to just add some money into this. You have an MOU, or some sort of agreement where the city pays for the construction equivalent of that increment of parking they're building. I think they're all, things to explore, and there doesn't have to be a policy for just one of them. What I would say the policy could be, if you want to follow that, is that it's the city's interest to add to its public parking supply, and we see that doing this when development is happening is an advantageous way for the city because we can help shape that. It's a structure that fits into your other UDC requirements, design standards, that sort of thing. It is something that you can kind of, change access to. You can figure out how to manage it. So I don't know if I've answered the question all that well. I think all of those points are great, and I think it's like yes to all of the above. You could pursue any of those, assuming it's legal, if it's anchored in a policy that we want to try to support ways to add to our parking supply in partnership with the private development markets, and we will explore how best to do that, possibly on a case-by-case basis.
Excellent. That's all really helpful. Again, really enjoy the discussion, and I think a key word that you keep on bringing up is policy, that I think if council does move forward with any of this, I think it is possible, I think it is important for it to be a very clear policy, so it doesn't appear that there's special deals or special negotiations, but more of here's the blanket agreement that council supports and wants to pursue. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Councilmember Tizer.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to be respectful of your time and the time of staff who've got some presentations, but just one question that I had. How did you take into account rideshare, especially its impact at peak times, which I would suspect is probably when rideshare has its biggest impact?
Another great question. As you may know, I won't get into the specifics of it too much, but that industry is very new, and that industry is pretty much 100% private, all private capital and private data management. And maybe for that reason, they're known for not sharing much information about who's actually here and who's coming. And that's been a challenge in cities all over the country, all over the world, really, that we can't estimate how much less parking we might need because we don't actually know how many Uber and Lyft trips are coming in. So what we try to do with that is kind of start with a baseline. We used a 10% kind of balance factor for a mix of rideshare, people who are employees who might have other options, and then people walking. You know, you do have residential right next to the downtown. Some of the market can be served without having to drive. So we did an overall kind of reduction of those. It would be good to be able to understand that in the future, and we encourage, even in these parking studies, for cities to find ways to partner with those providers. And, you know, you're just trying to help them do their job. They're trying to help you, you know, but that you can sort of set the dials, you know, a little bit closer in the future. Of course, COVID's affected that a lot too. So what we would have seen in this past year may not be accurate, but it is something that we try to account for and that we're always trying to understand better.
Thank you for the study.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. Thank you for the great presentation. I just, two questions. I wanted to know if you also considered the historic properties as city-owned properties for available parking, and how do the how do the respondents feel about shuttles as far as having shuttles available, whether they're autonomous or manned shuttles?
I'll go backwards if that's all right. The shuttle question, I need to look and see again if we had a question about that specifically in the survey, if that's an alternative. But we did propose a broader, you know, if you had other ways to park somewhere further away and get to downtown easily, would you consider that? And, you know, of course, there's generally strong support if you make it easy for people. So I think it's fair to say shuttles would be a big part of that. We're not going to ask people to, you know, ride bicycles from a mile away, you know, parking and coming into downtown. So yeah, there's certainly interest and support. We did not specifically map out what that would look like for downtown and say you should do it and you should plan on this kind of a service. That sort of thing, I hate to punt like this, but that sort of thing does need more kind of study and understanding to see how it fits. My firm and my practice within my firm, we do a lot of that kind of work for municipalities, and so understand it pretty well. And there's a lot of cost and complexity that needs to get kind of teased out with it. But I do think that there's support generally, and you'd want to start to look at how much it would cost and what you could serve and find the right balance if you wanted to explore that further. The other part of the question was about historic properties and what the city owns. So we didn't really take any parking out of the mix for any reason as potentially contributing. We counted all the parking spaces. We have an inventory of everything in that polygon that you saw, and then we counted all the cars that were parked in those spaces. So when you start breaking it down by the private only or the public only or the core area, you see the relationships a bit differently. But at first, we simply said, how many cars are there? How many spaces are there that could be filled? And started with that. So that suggests, it's a long answer to your question, but that suggests it's all kind of on the table. And if some of that parking is already city-owned that could be repurposed more easily, by all means, go for it. You know, that could be something that could start this ball rolling sooner.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Councilmember Judy?
Thank you, Mayor. Two quick questions. When you did the study, did you account for the hawk signal that will be going in across from East Alley to City Hall? You did.
Well, we didn't count anything or do anything quantitatively, assuming it's there, if that's what you're asking. We didn't, you know, create a scenario in which that exists. It's hard to know how it's going to get used, you know, and we spoke with your Public Works or your Department of Transportation staff about the project, just kind of knowing how it would work. So we tried to have a good handle on it. That would be, you know, something worth continuing to look at once it's open, but we did not take a scenario where we said, well, let's say 100 people go over here and use this. We don't know enough yet of how that would work and serve that demand.
And then secondly, you mentioned one of the hotel projects in your talk here via slide. I know there's two, and then we also have the Southern Post coming online. Did you compare, contrast, look at all three of those and the potential amount of parking spaces that would be here should all that be built?
We didn't include Southern Post in the mix. We did consider one or the other of the two developments over on the Wells Fargo site as kind of our hypothetical scenario of how development could work.
And was either one of them short parking spaces or plus parking spaces? I mean, from a parking perspective, which one was a better choice from your look?
Purely from a parking perspective, I'll answer the question this way. Sorry,
Yeah.
I've got to be careful with it. But purely from a parking perspective, West Alley is adding more. And significantly, I'll add, West Alley is adding more parking because UDC requirements around some of its land uses in the program have a certain amount of that parking, that they're speaking for. So there's office and retail in it, both of which, if you can see the graph that I've got up, it's the sort of pink and purple colors there around the middle of that layer. Those parking spaces are built to support those uses, but then the actual demand isn't there into the evening, which happens to be when the restaurants pick up. So there's more being added from this, and the mix of uses kind of gets back to that strategic planning, idea that you want to try to court development in a certain way and encourage certain kinds of development because it can help your problem. That's what's happening here. The Choice Gateway development, it's a smaller scale. It actually adds new parking spaces for the city as well. They propose 50. But it's a smaller scale, and it doesn't have that same mix of uses during the daytime. So purely from the parking standpoint, the West Alley project is on a bigger scale, and it's of the kind of mix that allows you to leverage underutilized space in the evening through something like an arrangement or, a deal with that developer.
Thank you. And then lastly, with the Southern Post project, did you feel it was too far out of scope right now, or it just didn't come into play? As far as, you said this lot might not be usable, so you think that over there?
It just didn't come into play. We didn't count the parking that's there prior to construction in the inventory, so that basically just kind of got excluded from the study area for now.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you. Great presentation. I appreciate the very visual, the great work you did and how wonderfully visual it is. So one of the things that really struck out to me, which I think is really good for us in planning, is just how consistent the mix of uses is and the demand for parking is throughout the day. So hopefully that will continue. In the research, did you look at or do you have any data on the market and who the visitors are? Like, were they repeat visitors? Were they new visitors? And kind of what was their experience in finding parking? Any information?
Good question. I think we have a pretty good composite of that from a few different sources. So one is the survey that we conducted. But part of it is the very generous and helpful staff at Roswell Inc. and Visit Roswell, were willing to help us get that data from their own work. They do market research all the time. So I apologize that I'm drawing a blank right now on repeat visitors. I think that is something included in what they gave us. I'm just not recalling what that is. But I do remember it's about 2/3 of downtown's visitors don't live in the city or don't live in the two main zip codes of the city. So there's, a majority of the visitors are coming from elsewhere. The degree to which they are continuing to come back, I can look and see from what we discussed with them. It's not a central point that we made in the study, but we did, hear from people in the survey that they want to come here and they want to visit more than one location. So they're treating it as a destination. This isn't just business on a very focused purpose. Right. Maybe some people come to City Hall for that, to pay a bill or have a meeting or something like that. But the Canton Street side, which is where the survey was most actively pushed, the sort of retail and restaurant business community, it's a large majority that wants to experience more of it.
And did you have any data on how easy they found it to find parking?
So that's in the survey, and we can make, so the full report document we shared with the DDA already, and I'm sure the DDA will want to work with the city on how to make it more public on the website, but there's an appendix that lists all the survey results.
Okay.
Generally speaking, though, I'd say the trend was, it's not that easy. We don't have enough signage. Sure. It's not clear if I should be here, if I shouldn't. The signage is inconsistent. Sometimes it's fine print signs, you know, down by the floor of a building saying you'll get towed. Sometimes it's very clear. The city has some signage. Private operators have different signage. I think there is a lot of room for streamlining there. Part of what we recommend is that you start working on that. We understand there's a very special historic character of this downtown, so we weren't going to come in and propose a wayfinding system with an aesthetic that might not work. But, you know, something pretty simple could probably do the trick. You know, 3 different categories, you color code the signs, A, B, C, whatever it is, just to say this is public that you can use during these times. This is only if you're supposed to be here, and then it's a lot clearer.
Great, thank you.
Additional questions? Yes, Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation and the analysis. On the third to last slide, when on the study area, you suggest one of the approach is to set a goal of 50 new spaces per year to be brought under city management on the third, yes. So my question is, was this part of the study to identify those sites that they can hold at least 50 new spaces, or was not part of the study? And if so, how many spaces do you identify that will hold 50 new spaces moving forward?
We didn't pick out the lots and say, you should go get these. We did not do that much, but we do have inventory information that will tell you on every lot how many spaces there are. So if you wanted to use, I'm just kind of putting an idea out there, but if you wanted to use 50 as your annual goal, and you said, we'd really like not to have to do 5 leases to get those 50, but let's go for 1 lease a year, you know, you're going to have information from our inventory that we're making available to staff who can search through and say, here are all the ones with 50 that don't have a lease right now. Should we start with that list? So we didn't get the chance to speak to those property owners and stakeholders to start kind of, you know, testing that out enough. But we did, you know, confirm what the inventory is so you can know how many spaces are in every lot, and you can decide the best strategy for trying to, you know, make those available.
Okay, but so then this 50 new spaces goal is something realistic, given the space?
You have 2,900, and, you know, only 30% of those are at some time of the day public. So there's a lot of parking out there. There's about 2,000 spaces still that are restricted in some form. So there's plenty of it out there. The 50 a year, it's just kind of a starting point. There's no magic to that number. But the idea with that is if you keep going with this for 10 years and you manage to keep everybody who's bought into this program renewing those leases, at the end of the decade, you'll have 500 more. And that was the kind of round number that we thought about for a parking deck. That's usually, you know, when you try to build a parking facility, you want to get some inventory. Using Alpharetta and the garages they've built as comparables, you know, their city center garage by their city hall is about 450. So thinking of that as your footprint is sort of an example. This would be if you wanted to get that same number made available, but not go the route of constructing a garage. You know, this is what you could do if you kept at this for about 10 years. That's 50 might not be enough. You might start doing it and realize we have more people interested and we've got plenty of need, so let's go for 100. You might decide you want to do more, or 50 might be too ambitious in the first year or two as you're kind of testing out how to budget for this, how to set up a more formal program. So this is simply our kind of, you know, starting point recommendation, but you need to find a way to tailor it to what you're actually able to do and administer. I think that's the key part.
Great, thank you.
Additional comments, questions from council? Well, thank you so much. You've given us a lot of valuable information. I also thank the DDA. And, you know, this is just a starting point for us. Now we have a better grasp on what we're dealing with, and thank you for your recommendations. They seem to be very reasonable. And so this is the first of many conversations and decisions we'll be making. So thank you again, and thank you to the DDA. We appreciate your hard work.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.
The next item on the agenda is the presentation of my 2022 proposed budget.
Public comment?
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. It's nice to be back here in the council chambers to present the proposed budget. It's been over a year, and I'm glad I don't have to worry about forgetting to share my screen or, my microphone not working. So while the Zoom meetings were interesting, I'm glad that we are back here for the in-person meetings. Thank you for the opportunity to present the mayor's budget for fiscal year 2022. This proposed budget is the result of the hard work of several staff members over the last few months, and I would like to take a minute to thank all of them. Thank you first to Madam Mayor and the council members for your support and confidence in the work that we do, and thank you, Mr. Palmer and Mr. Fisher, for the trust and confidence that you place in us. A big thank you to all the department heads and their staff for their understanding, support, and cooperation during this entire process, and for being patient with my constant barrage of emails and reminders. And finally, this budget would not be possible without the hard work, dedication, and help of our finance director, Mr. Ryan Luckett, and my awesome team members, Lynn and Lacey. So thank you, everybody. So in today's presentation, I will do a quick recap of the fiscal year 2021 budget, and then highlight some of the key points of the fiscal year 2022 budget. The third section will be a review of the base budget and how it is developed. Then I will move on to the requests from the departments for the general fund and other funds. And finally, I will review the next steps in the budget process. So first, let me do a quick recap of the FY 2021 budget. And as you all know, we were in the process of putting the proposed budget for fiscal year 2021 together when the pandemic hit, and we had to revise our revenue projections. So our initial forecast was a shortfall of $9.5 million in revenue. However, as we progressed through the year and things started to improve, the revenues came in better than originally anticipated. And we also received some funding from the CARES Act. So our current revenue shortfall for FY 2021, including the CARES Act reimbursement of $3.9 million, is anticipated at approximately $680,000. Without that, it would have been at about $4.7 million. Since at the time of the preparation of the FY 2021 budget, we did not know what the full impact of the pandemic would be, we had deferred funding, most maintenance and one-time capital projects. But with a recovering economy and better than anticipated revenues, we were able to fund many of those projects during the fiscal year at the first quarter and the mid-year budget updates. About $9.5 million in funding was approved, and some of the items approved included a one-time compensation for employees, 4 new positions, $800,000 in COVID relief grants for businesses and residents, and over $6.5 million was approved for maintenance and one-time capital projects. So that was a brief recap of the FY 2021 budget. The next slide highlights some of the key points of the fiscal year 2022 budget. The fiscal year 2022 budget is balanced, and we continue to maintain our general fund reserve of 25%, which will be at $19.9 million for FY 2022. Another highlight of the fiscal year 2022 budget is the growth in the base budget from FY 2021 to FY 2022 of approximately $6.6 million. Now, this increase will be discussed in detail in the next section of the presentation. As a result of the 9.9% increase in the base budget, we have only $2.4 million available for new operating and maintenance capital requests. So each year, when we receive budget requests, we work with the department heads and their staff to try and fund some requests either in the current approved base, or if it is a one-time funding need, we analyze each department's budget to see if there would be enough savings to fund such items within the current fiscal year. For fiscal year 2022, of all the budget requests that we received from departments, approximately $290,000 is being funded within the current base budget or from current year savings. The fiscal year 2022 proposed budget also includes a 3% average merit-based pay increase for all full-time employees, part-time staff, and firefighters that would be effective starting January 1, 2022. So those were some of the highlights of the FY 2022 budget. We now move to the next section where I will discuss how we develop our base budget, what comprises the base budget, and then review the changes to the base budget that I just highlighted on the previous slide. The base budget is the ongoing funding to keep a department functioning. For ease of understanding, I have broken down the base budget into 3 major components and will discuss each in some detail in further slides. The first is the personnel expenses, which makes up 69% of the total base budget and is controlled by the budget staff. And then the second component, the fixed operating expenses, is also controlled by budget staff and makes up 18% of the total base budget. So basically 87% of the base budget is controlled by the budget staff. And then the third component, titled discretionary operating expenses, are the ones that can be adjusted by the departments and make up 13% of the total base budget. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, the personnel expenses, which include employee salaries, FICA and Medicare, retirement benefits, make up 69% of the base budget and are controlled by budget staff. And these expenses are reviewed and analyzed by us each year as part of the budget process, based on the roster of the full-time and part-time employee data as of the date that the analysis was done. The second portion of operating expenses that are controlled by the budget staff are utilities, gasoline, oil, fleet rate and lease budget, the group health, workers' comp, risk and liability expenses, indirect costs, debt payments, and transfers. Now, these expenses are also reviewed by budget staff each budget cycle and adjusted based on actuals. And this slide explains how the budget for each of these items is determined. The remaining operating expenses, which makes up 13% of the total base budget, is the only portion that can be adjusted by the departments. Now, these expenses include supplies, repairs and maintenance, contract services, education, dues and fees, just to name a few. And departments are allowed to adjust some of the operating line items during the budget process, but those adjustments have to net to zero. Any increase due to budget adjustments within the base has to be submitted as a new operating request by the department and has to be approved by mayor and council. After the budget has been adopted, departments are allowed to temporarily transfer funds between line items during the fiscal year if a situation warrants it, but that transfer is temporary until we get to the next year's budget process. So this was a brief explanation of how the base budget is developed each year. In the next few slides, I will discuss the change in the base budget from FY 2021 to FY 2022 of the $6.6 million that I mentioned earlier. So as I had mentioned in one of my initial slides, there is an increase of $6.6 million in the FY 2022 proposed base budget as compared to what was approved for FY 2021. This increase is due to the recurring nature of items that were approved during the first quarter and mid-year budget amendments. And in the next couple of slides, I will highlight some of these items that make up that increase. The first is the compensation study recommendations that were approved and implemented, which was about $2.6 million. And this $2.6 million is the full year of the first phase and half a year, the 6 months of the second phase. Next is the recurring cost of the new operating requests that were approved during the FY 2021 budget process. Of the 931,205, approximately 785,000 is the general fund support of the Recreation Participation Fund. And then next we have the increase from the mid-year budget amendments. Of the FY 2021 operating requests that were approved at mid-year, 627,644 in recurring costs got added to the base budget. This includes 4 full-time positions that were approved, including the Economic Development Director position and the $100,000 compensation for the police department that was also approved. Next, we have the adjustment from the city vehicle leasing program, and this is the cost of the aftermarket and the lease amount for the vehicles ordered to be replaced, which is approximately, I think, 67 vehicles that we're talking about here. And then the next item we have is the GTIB or resurfacing loan, and this is the annual debt service amount of $365,000. That's also been added to the base budget. And then our defined contribution retirement, that's gone up by a little over $364,000. The other items that have increased, that have led to the increase in our base budget, are the risk and liability insurance, which is close to $300,000. We also have about $272,044 in the annual debt service that we are paying for the citywide network and fiber switch replacement project, which was approved as part of the FY 2021 budget. And then we also have the GDOT payment for the Georgia 400 and the Southbridge Aesthetics. That's the $179,286 that you have. And then we had the recurring cost from the first quarter budget amendments for fiscal year 2021, which was about $179,000. And then the defined benefit costs have also gone up, which has added close to $150,000 to the base budget. And finally, the utilities, gasoline, and oil budgets, that's gone up by close to $125,000. So these are some of the big items that have resulted in a growth in the base budget for fiscal year 2022 as compared to the fiscal year 2021 base budget. This chart provides a history of how the general fund base budget has grown over the last 5 years. And typically the growth in the base budget from year to year has been between $2 and $3 million. FY 2022 is the year that we are seeing the largest increase in the base budget, and the components of that increase were just reviewed in the previous slides. This chart here provides a 10-year history of the general fund budget and how it has changed over the years between the operating, maintenance capital, and one-time capital budget. And as you can see, there has been a steady increase since fiscal year 2013. We saw a drop last year, which was due to the pandemic. This chart here also provides a 10-year history of the general fund budget, but this time it is by department. Some portion of the EPW budget was within the general fund up until fiscal year 2014. From FY 2015, their entire budget was moved to the enterprise funds. So the stacked bars here that you see on this chart have been organized in order of the share of the department budget to the total general fund budget, with the largest starting from the bottom. Police department has the largest share of the general fund budget, followed by recreation and parks, administration, fire, and transportation. We now move to the next section of the presentation that will highlight the revenues and expenditures of all funds. So the proposed revenue for fiscal year 2022 for all funds is $153 million. And a major portion of that revenue comes from sales tax, property tax, and charges for services provided to our residents, like garbage and recycling, water and stormwater, and the recreation programs. This slide provides a 10-year history of the property tax revenues and millage rate of the city of Roswell. There has been a steady increase in the property tax revenues over the years, and the revenue for fiscal year 2022 is based upon the current millage rate of 4.955. We will have separate hearings on the millage rate, which will be held in the coming months, and the dates for these will be announced and published later. Excuse me. This slide gives a picture of the 10-year history of the sales tax revenue, which is another major source of revenue for the city. As you can see, there was a decline in the revenue in fiscal year 2020 and 2021 due to COVID. With the economy doing better, we are expecting the revenues to be higher for fiscal year 2022 when compared to the last 2 years. The red section of the stacked bars represents the T-SPLOST revenues, and FY 2022 is the last year for the current approved T-SPLOST, which expires in March of 2022, which is only 9 months of revenue for the fiscal year. Hence, you see a smaller portion there. The proposed expenditures across all funds for fiscal year 2022 is $150 million. And this slide gives you a breakdown of that budget by department. The full-time positions proposed for fiscal year 2022 is 632, which is an increase of 2 full-time positions over fiscal year 2021. As you can see on this slide, the number of full-time positions has fluctuated over the last 10 years, and that is due to some reorganizing that was done in the past, in addition to some new positions being added and some existing positions being removed. You will see a drop first in fiscal year 2013 as compared to 2012, and that was the year when the detention center was reorganized into a short-term holding facility, and 15 positions were eliminated. And that was also the year when the Community Development Department was reorganized and the code enforcement and building inspection services were outsourced, thus eliminating 11 positions there. But then there were other positions that were added, so that kind of the net change was what you see here on that chart. And then in fiscal year 2014, there were about, at mid-year, during the mid-year budget amendment, there were about 12 positions that were eliminated in court services, which was basically the marshal services. And then there were the other positions that were added. And then again, in fiscal year 2018, there was a decline in the number of positions from 611 to 599. And that was basically because the number of positions at the detention center was closed, and so 18 positions were eliminated as a result of that. So that's the reason you see that decline. And then in fiscal year 2020, there was another reorganization that was done in community development, where the building inspection and the code enforcement services was brought in-house, which added 12 positions there, and hence you see that increase in that year. So that's a brief history of the full-time positions in the general fund. Now, in this section, I will provide an overview of the proposed budget for the general fund, and we will start with the proposed revenues. So the proposed revenues for the general fund for fiscal year 2022 are $82.3 million, and sales tax, property tax, and business taxes make up a major portion of that. The proposed expenditures for the fiscal year 2022 are $82.3 million, and this chart provides a breakdown of that budget by department. This slide here provides a summary of the proposed budget for the general fund. The proposed revenues for the general fund for fiscal year 2022, as I mentioned, are approximately $80.5 million. The proposed base budget is a little over $78 million. The operating requests from departments that are currently proposed to be funded are about $1.7 million. The partner organization requests that have been funded currently total $386,500. And the proposed maintenance capital for fiscal year 2022 is $280,000 in the general fund. There is also an additional $750,000 for a fire truck that is in the capital projects fund, and it is not included in this summary as it is a separate fund. So the total proposed operating budget is close to $80.5 million. That leaves us with $6,321 in unallocated operating funds. The one-time capital requests that have been proposed to be funded using fund balance are $1.87 million. Our total proposed budget for the general fund is $82.3 million. We are required to maintain a 25% reserve in the general fund as per our policy, and the amount that is allocated for that increase is a little over $1.8 million. So that would leave us with a general fund balance of a little over $15,000 that is unallocated. In this section, I will review the general fund requests that are currently proposed to be funded. And I will not get into the details of the request as they will be discussed at length by the department heads at Wednesday's special call budget work session. Starting with the operating requests, in the administration department, we have two that are proposed to be funded. The first is the monthly service for the fiber speed upgrade, and the second request is to add some operating costs for the economic development director position that was approved at mid-year. And that basically includes travel, education and training, and computer equipment, et cetera, for that particular position. And then in the citywide, we have the group health expenses, which are expected to increase in fiscal year 2022, and we are requesting a little over $600,000 in funding for that. The FY 2022 budget also includes a proposed salary increase for employees in the amount of $643,431. That will go into effect January 1, 2022, if approved by Mayor and Council. And for community development, the proposed budget includes adding a leased vehicle for the engineering division. The E911 fund has been self-sustaining all these years with the revenues they have been receiving through the 911 fees and the fund balance that they had. However, in fiscal year 2022, the budget will no longer be, the fund will no longer be able to support itself and will have to be subsidized by the general fund. Hence, we are proposing the transfer of $290,000 to the E911 fund from the general fund. Next, we have the finance department. So I'm going to make a case for this one. The budget division within the finance department has seen an increase in the workload and projects over the last several years, with the staffing level remaining at 3 full-time employees for almost 17 years. The scope and complexity of our work dealing with huge amounts of data has increased, and we have a lot more requests from departments to do complex analytical work for them. The work performed by the budget staff benefits the city as a whole, and hence we are requesting 2 full-time budget analyst positions, but currently only 1 position is proposed to be funded at $64,000. In Recreation and Parks Department, we currently have 2 requests funded, $30,000 for the janitorial services and $12,000 for the July 4th fireworks. Of the maintenance capital requests submitted by the departments, we are proposing funding only 4. $195,000 for the facilities condition assessment, $750,000 for the replacement of a fire vehicle engine. This is actually a lease purchase and is budgeted in the capital projects fund, but is shown here with the general fund request. The 2 other requests proposed to be funded are the replacement of the tactical vests and helmets at $10,000 and $75,000 for the Recreation and Parks Maintenance Program, which is the annual plan to maintain parks and amenities. This slide and the next list the one-time capital projects that are currently proposed to be funded. In community development, we have $40,000 for the procurement of elevation certificates and $300,000 for the formal recodification of the UDC. There is $37,500 funded for the fire department communications equipment, and then we have a few items funded with within the Recreation and Parks Department. The first among them is the $150,000 for the Cultural Arts Center space renovation for Roswell Historical Society, $150,000 for the facility condition assessment, $32,000 for the replacement of HVAC controls, $85,000 for the Cultural Arts Center seat replacement, and then $31,000 for the renovation of the outdoor pool at the Roswell Area Park. And a few of the transportation department requests that are proposed to be funded are listed here with the amounts. There is $46,000 in funding for some equipment that is listed here on this slide, $400,000 for road resurfacing, $100,000 for bridge maintenance and safety program, $150,000 for the Grimes Bridge Road corridor, and $350,000 for the Woodstock northbound left turn lane at the new Crabapple Middle School. So these were all the proposed funded requests for fiscal year 2022. The next section of the presentation is the budget requests that are currently proposed as unfunded. And again, I will not read through each one of them as there are many of them. And they are categorized by department and by type, and I will just highlight a few of them. So we'll start with the operating unfunded requests. So within the administration department, there's a total of close to $500,000 unfunded. And among them are 3 position requests, a couple of requests from GIS, and a couple of requests for special events. And they're all listed here on this slide. And then on this slide, you see operating requests of 3 departments that are unfunded. And again, these are mostly new position requests and a request for funding fleet telematics. And you will see these fleet fund requests in some of the other funds too. And this is basically the general fund portion of the cost of those 2 requests. The fire department's request for 30 full-time station officers and an assistant fire marshal are unfunded. And that is a request of more than $2.6 million. And then in the police department, $368,306 worth of operating requests are unfunded. And these include 2 position requests and some equipment for the department. Among the operating requests that were submitted by the Recreation and Parks Department, there are 5 new position requests, vehicle requests, and funding for holiday lighting and tree replacement at the historic Roswell Town Square that are unfunded at an amount of close to $390,000. And then Transportation Department has a request to convert 2 part-time crew worker positions into full-time that are currently unfunded as well. Moving on to the maintenance capital requests, in the administration department, we have more than $2.1 million in maintenance capital unfunded. So most of that $2 million is for the maintenance of city facilities and buildings. And then the fleet division in environmental and public works has a couple of maintenance capital requests that are currently unfunded as well, and you will see them again within the fleet fund as well. The fire department and the police departments have $103,500 and $169,000 respectively unfunded in maintenance capital, and these are basically annual replacement programs for equipment. This slide here lists the unfunded maintenance capital requests of the Recreation and Parks Department, totaling a little over $1.2 million. And some of them include the funding for park improvements, playground replacements, trail repairs, and historic house properties maintenance. In the Transportation Department, the biggest maintenance capital item that is partially unfunded is the citywide road resurfacing and reconstruction program at $2.6 million. The department had requested $3 million, and only $400,000 of that is currently proposed to be funded. Moving to the one-time capital requests. So the unfunded for community development, this particular slide shows you the unfunded requests for community development and environmental public works. And again, I'm not going to read through them. And then on the next slide, we have about over $6.1 million in one-time capital requests for the fire department that are unfunded. And most of that cost is for the replacement of 2 fire stations. For the police department, we have about $5.4 million in one-time capital requests that is unfunded, and most of it is the request for the construction of the new 911 emergency communications center. And then they have a few others. We have $627,000 worth of one-time capital requests unfunded for the Recreation and Parks Department, and then all these items are listed in here. And these will all be discussed in greater detail on Wednesday. Hence, I'm not going through them. For the Transportation Department, there is more than $4 million in one-time capital requests that is unfunded, and all the projects are listed here. And the biggest one among them is the sidewalk connectivity program at $1 million. And then we have several other one-time capital projects in here. We now come to the other funds, and this section highlights the proposed revenues and expenditures for these funds and the budget requests that have been proposed to be funded and unfunded. Starting with the solid waste fund, the proposed revenues are $11.7 million, and the proposed expenditures are $12.2 million. This slide provides a list of the proposed funded and unfunded operating requests for the solid waste fund. Among the funded requests, we have the increase in cost of group health, the employee salary increase that I talked about in the general fund, section 2, and a request of funds to purchase additional garbage bins, and one position request for the new transfer station that will be constructed. And the unfunded requests are the ones requested by the fleet division, and this is the solid waste funds portion of the cost of those requests. Among the funded maintenance capital requests, we have the replacement of 2 garbage trucks, and the unfunded requests are solid waste funds portion again of the fleet division requests. The one-time capital requests funded are a dumpster delivery vehicle and the replacement of a forklift at a total of $165,000. Again, the unfunded items listed here are the solid waste funds portion of the cost of the fleet division request, which you will see in the fleet fund as well. The solid waste division is proposing increasing the fees for some current services that they provide and also establishing some new fees. And this slide provides a list of those fees, and I'll just quickly go through them. So there is the current fee for the curbside large item collection is $20, and the department is proposing to increase that to $30. Currently, there is no fee for the large container set out, and the department is proposing a fee of $50 for that particular service. The current fee for the replacement of containers is $25, and the department is proposing to increase that to $50. There is no fee currently being charged for the replacement of a commercial dumpster, and it is being proposed to charge $150 for that. There is also no fee being charged for the blocked commercial dumpsters, and the department is proposing to charge $100 for that. Currently, the fee for extra commercial collections for special events is between $45 and $55, and the department is proposing to increase that to $100. The department is also proposing to charge a $3 per gallon container fee for paint recycling, for which currently there is no fee. So these are some of the proposed fee increases in the solid waste fund. Next, we have the water and sewer fund. Here, the proposed revenues for fiscal year 2022 are $4.8 million, and the proposed expenditures are $4.2 million. Among the operating requests here within this fund, again, we have the group health increase, the employee salary increase, and a couple other requests which total to close to $100,000. And among the unfunded requests, we have the fleet fund, the water funds portion of the fleet requests that are shown here. For maintenance capital, there is $400,000 proposed to be funded for the water line replacements and $27,000 for the SCADA communication system. And the unfunded maintenance capital requests are again the water funds portion of the fleet division requests. In one-time capital, we have a total of $43,100 funded for the surveillance and duress system at the water plant. And the unfunded requests, again, are the fleet fund requests shown here. We then have the stormwater fund, for which the proposed revenues for fiscal year 2022 are $3.4 million, and the proposed expenditures are $3.5 million. In the operating request, again, we have the group health increase and the employee salary increase at $31,405. And in the unfunded request, we have the stormwater funds portion of the fleet division request. And in the maintenance capital, we have the stormwater master project list, which is funded at $900,000. And the portion that is unfunded for that particular project is $135,000. And then the other two requests, unfunded requests that you see are again the stormwater funds portion of the fleet division requests. Oops, I didn't change my slide. And then in the one-time capital, we just have one request that is funded for the large equipment replacement at $65,000. And the unfunded requests that you see are, again, stormwater funds portion of the fleet division requests. In the fleet fund, only the group health increase and the average of 3% salary increase is funded. All of their operating, maintenance, and capital requests are unfunded, and they are listed on this particular slide and the next. And these are the unfunded requests that you also saw in the other funds earlier, and I will not be reading through them. Moving on to the E911 fund, the proposed revenues for this fund for fiscal year 2022 are $2.7 million. And as I had mentioned on a previous slide, the E911 fund has been self-sustaining all these years. But in FY 2022, the fund will no longer be able to support itself fully. Hence, we are proposing transferring $290,000 from the general fund to make up for the difference in revenues and expenditures in the particular fund, and that's the transfer in amount that you see on the pie chart to the left. The proposed expenditures for this fund are $3 million. Moving on to the requests. So E911 has requested 2 full-time communication officers positions that are currently unfunded, taking into consideration that the fund cannot sustain itself. And the rest of the unfunded items are, again, E911 shares, E911's share of the fleet division request that you've seen in the other funds as well. Excuse me. Then we have the impact fee fund. So there are 2 one-time capital projects funded that we are proposing funding with impact fees. The first one is the Chattahoochee River pedestrian bridge for the transportation department at a cost of $625,000. And the implementation of the River Park Master Plan for Recreation and Parks at close to $500,000. So that is a total of a little over $1 million to be funded using impact fee money. And then the CDBG grant fund, we have 1 request. They've requested a full-time grant specialist position. And this $36,297 that you see here is the portion that will be funded out of the grant fund. There is also a portion that will be funded out of the general fund, which was within the unfunded list of the general fund. The hotel motel revenues, as you all know, have been the hardest hit during the pandemic. Though the revenues for FY 2022 are anticipated to be better than fiscal year 2021, they will still not be at the pre-pandemic level. We are anticipating revenues to come in a little under $1 million, and the expenditures are proposed at $673,700. There are 3 categories of revenues, and the split between the 3 is shown on the pie chart to the left. The TCT portion of the revenues is meant for tourism, conventions, and trade shows, and is budgeted for Roswell Convention and Visitors Bureau, and you will see that on further slides. $300,000 from the unrestricted portion of the revenues is proposed to be transferred to the general fund, and you will see that too in the next slide. The TPD, or the tourism product development portion of the revenue, is currently unallocated. So on this slide, like I said on the previous slide, the TCT portion of the revenues, which is the $367,500, is budgeted entirely for the Roswell Convention and Visitors Bureau. And this funding to them is contingent upon mayor and council approval of the updated contract between them and the city. And then you also see the transfer out to the general fund of $300,000 that I mentioned on the previous slide. The unfunded requests for Roswell Convention and Visitors Bureau are in the amount of $100,000 for the marketing of the Come Back Safely campaign and the Film Roswell campaign. And the funding requests for these 2 campaigns will be considered upon presentation of the marketing plan at a future mayor and council meeting. We next have the auto rental excise tax fund. The estimated available fund balance for in this particular fund is at a little over $33,000. The proposed revenues are $300,000 in this fund, and we are proposing to transfer to the general fund $277,500, which will go towards funding Roswell Inc.'s request, and you will see that on the next slide. Then we have the partner organization requests. So we have the total funded request for all 4 partner organizations, the remaining 4 partner organizations, I should say, is $386,500. Roswell Arts Fund, $50,000. Roswell Historical Society, $30,000. HRBP at $29,000, and Roswell Inc. at $277,500. And this $277,500 that you see is being funded with the transfer from the auto rental excise tax fund that you saw on the previous slide. Among the unfunded requests, before I move to the unfunded, just to mention again, so these partner organization requests that are proposed to be funded again are contingent upon mayor and council approval of the updated contracts with these particular organizations. Among the unfunded requests for these partner organizations, Roswell Arts Fund is unfunded at $148,000, Roswell Historical Society at $50,000, and Historic Roswell Beautification Project is unfunded for $11,412 worth of requests. So finally, as part of the next steps of the budget process, we have a budget work session on Wednesday, April 28th. Where the department heads will be speaking to each one of their department requests that you saw in tonight's presentation in greater detail. And then we have the first reading on May 10th, and we have the second reading on May 24th. We will also have an add and delete process for council for the first and the second reading of the budget. And as part of that process, budget staff will compile requests from mayor and council to add or delete items in the proposed budget. And staff will distribute that updated list to council on a regular basis. And then the add and delete list will be presented at the first reading and the second reading as well for consideration by mayor and council. So that is the end of my presentation, ma'am.
Thank you very much for a fabulous presentation. You probably need a drink of water.
Yes, I do.
But thank you, and I realize, council, this is your first look at this budget, and I thank the finance staff for getting this together and bringing it forward, and I fully expect there will be a lot of questions going forward. If we need any additional work sessions, I am more than happy to schedule those. But I know we'll have a full day on Wednesday going over these requests, and you all hopefully will have an opportunity to review the budget in greater detail than was presented to you tonight. So, Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much for the detailed presentation. I would just like to bring you back to 2 slides. So the first one is your page 16.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Great, thanks. So, you know, I would like to know here now and the next, few days or few weeks when we keep talking about the budget, with this graph, it's very visual how maintenance and probably, I don't know, I'm not sure, but one-time capital have been decreasing, especially the maintenance capital, so versus the operating. So, I would like to understand better in the next few sessions about why are we shrinking maintenance capital, and maybe, I don't know, I'm not sure, again, you would be able to tell me in the future about one-time capital. And then, if so, what are the implications and what do we need to do to keep it up? So then, my next question also doesn't have to be answered this minute, but I would like to discuss this on this following session. Is on page 23.
Yes.
do we have also a slide like this for the part-time positions?
Not currently, sir, but
Can we include in the future as well so we can visualize full-time positions and part-time positions as well and the history of both of them? That will be very helpful moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Zapata. Councilmember Tizer.
Thank you. And Harpreet, it's always one of my favorite times of the year to see how long you can do this, and your grasp of our numbers, is amazing and comforting. So thank you for that.
thank you.
What I'd like to understand a little better when we get into our regular meetings, and perhaps this is something that has to come from the mayor. It's my understanding that we've got an amount of CARES money, or this second economic stimulus plan. Last I saw, it was a 12-point-something million number split over a couple of years, but that number wasn't necessarily firm. To the extent that we can talk about what at a future meeting, what we know it can be used for, I think that would be helpful for a series of my questions about capital, maintenance, capital, et cetera, and I think it would help with Council Member Zapata's first question also. My understanding is that half of that comes over 2 years, but I'm not sure if they're fiscal or calendar, et cetera, and what the restrictions are of those things. But I suspect you've calculated some of that in your budget adds and deletes as presented. So that would be really helpful to understand.
And it would be very helpful to understand, but we can't pin that down yet. We're not certain of the amount yet. While we're expecting $12.5 million, we're not certain of that amount. We're also not certain what we can use it for yet. So, and the one thing that a budget principle we use in these types of situations is, and I would highly suggest that we only use it for maintenance and one-time capital, because it's a one-time deal. It's not going to continue to come to us year after year. So we will discuss it, and hopefully the feds can come up with the guidelines for it and pin some of this down. I'm not sure when they plan on doing that or what kind of timeline they're on. So, but we'll discuss it. Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. Harpreet, absolutely phenomenal presentation. Definitely a true professional, and I think couldn't have been better, both with the level of detail and how you presented it. So, couple comments and questions I have. And Harpreet, obviously, you did the great job delivering it, but I know the entire department does a phenomenal job with putting this all
Couldn't
together.
have done it without them.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you all. So one thing that jumps out at me is as I had raised in the past, including last budget year, is I was really, really hoped this council would be willing to kind of go toward, at least more towards at least a variation of a zero-based budget. And so, for example, when I look at this, you have separated, obviously, a large percentage of the budget is the base budget. And then you've got the personnel expenses, the fixed operating expenses, and the discretionary operating expenses. And so I guess a question I have is the discretionary operating expenses, which make up 13% of the total base budget, are those within here? Or are they within this presentation? Or are they only if you read the fine print within the actual budget?
They are there within this presentation as a total number, not
the individual expense and the decisions, because
Yes.
again, I really feel it's beneficial to go towards a really a zero-based budget, in which case to really even just understand what are those new discretionary expenses that represent 13%. So that's more of just an overall comment on the process. I have some questions on some numbers that I saw, both funded items and unfunded, but I'll save those for the different departments. But there were a few numbers, both funded and funded, that were much larger than I expected, because it seemed like we had done similar things in the past, and it was, the numbers I'm seeing today, one of them was 30 times what I felt I saw in the past. Another one was 10 times what I feel I saw a handful of years ago. So I'll definitely want to understand that with the different departments. another department question. And then I guess an inverse of Councilman Zapata's question. So he had pointed out just the decrease in the maintenance capital. So as we look at other cities that have the high rating that we have, our AAA rating, which I think we should all be really proud of, I'd really be curious, if you add their maintenance capital and their one-time capital together, what is their percentage of their total budget compared to ours? Because to me, as I look at it, as I see operating expense increasing so much, and I see maintenance capital decreasing by what looks like a significant percentage as well, I'd be curious kind of where are we compared to some of those other AAA cities? And then also, related to the inverse as well, I'd be kind of curious, I think Councilman Zapata wanted to understand better the decrease in maintenance capital that we're looking at. What I'm curious about, and don't need you to answer right now, is if I'm reading this graph correctly, it looks like our operating budget alone will be greater than any total budget we've had in the past. And I guess what I'm curious about, the large increase in operating, is that purely 100% based on the salary increases, or are there other factors that led to such a large increase in our operating expenses? So that's something I'd just like to understand through the process. And then you'd already answered my question on adds and deletes, so appreciate that clarification. Again, stellar job from Harper at you, but really the whole finance department.
Thank you. Additional questions, comments from council? Well, thank you all. Like I said, we will have plenty of time to discuss this in work sessions, plenty of time for public comment, plenty of time to dive in deep into this budget. So thank you again for your excellent presentation. And I would also like to thank the Finance Department for everything you've done in the past and everything I know you're going to be doing in the future. So thank you all very much. You do a great job. And I think it was Councilmember Tizer. It is comforting to know that we've got such a stellar team behind us. So we will discuss this further. Like I said, if we need additional work sessions, we can always schedule those as well. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Next, I'd like to go to Environmental and Public Works. Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. Item number 5, approval of an update to the solid waste business plan.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This item is a request to approve the update to the solid waste business plan. Updating the plan is something we try to do every 5 to 10 years. At times we use consultants for master planning and business planning, and that can cost us anywhere from $40,000 to upwards of 6 figures. For this update, we asked Nick Pizzello, our solid waste division manager, to lead an internal team to develop this solid waste business plan update. The team included a number of people from our support services division, from solid waste, and also from budget and finance. A lot of those folks are here tonight. Their goal was to examine all aspects of the city's solid waste operation. During the course of the team's work, we came back to you a number of times to provide you with an update in September and December of 2020. And I just want to step back to September of 2020 and talk to you a little bit about the guidance we asked for that evening at committee. And what we were looking at was the sustainability of the recycling center. As we got involved in this plan, what we noticed most pronounced was the recycling center and trying to ensure its sustainability for the future. And we discussed changes with you in the recycling market. We talked about in 2018 the fact that China banned the import of recyclables that are not meeting a very stringent purity standard, and that has severely impacted the recycling market and the revenue that we're able to realize from the material that we're collecting, sorting, and selling. Additionally, there was a boom in the petrochemical market, which basically changed the dynamic of the plastic industry to the point that virgin plastic is now cheaper than recycled plastic, and all of those things had a tremendous bearing on our recycling center. The changing economics there made us realize that we had to make some maybe potentially hard decisions and look more carefully at the sustainability there. And while the center has never been self-sustaining from a dollars and cents point of view, we had noticed in the last couple of years it had gotten worse. The point is that the expenses were outweighing the revenues by upwards of $250,000 annually. So that deficit was exerting pressure on the rates and fees that we charge our customers. So we asked the team to focus on a more sustainable model, and the first thing we brought back to you was asking the question, do we want to continue to stay open to non-residents at the recycling center? And the recommendation was that we were going to limit ourselves to our Roswell residents and to our businesses, and that we wanted to increase the awareness and use of the recycling center for our own folks. And one of the things you heard from us was bring us your glass. One of the things that we get a tremendous turnaround on is glass at the recycling center. We're able to sell that product. In addition, getting that product out of our waste stream decreases the weights in our trucks, decreases our hauling costs at the transfer station, and additionally, we're able to actually recycle it, whereas when it goes into our curbside recycling, that's actually a reuse. So this is a higher recycling objective. And lastly, we told you we were going to try to partner with some of the sister cities and see if they were interested in actually getting involved and working with us in the recycling center and actually paying to have their folks come in and use our center. So in December, we brought back our first cut at our recommendations, and tonight we're going to come back one more time to you. I know we came and saw you in May and talked about some of the recommendations, and Nick reviewed those with you, and we've taken all of that guidance, and it is now reflected in the solid waste business plan that's in your packet. And I'm going to turn it over to Nick so he can give you a quick review of the recommendations and discuss that a little bit with you, and then we'll take some questions.
Seems like it hasn't been that long. So if you remember, we've got some recommendations on the maintenance of the fleet, the transfer station, operations, management systems, everything we've talked about before, basically. We're going to jump right to remaining close to non-residents. Charge for paint recycling. Harpreet did a great job explaining that in her budget presentation. Limit the while you wait shredding service from Tuesday through Friday, 2 to 4, and standardize the hours of operations, 8:30 to 5, Tuesday through Saturday. We got the new baler, the residential rear loader, the front loader, the dumpster delivery vehicle, and then the automated side loading truck in fiscal year 23. And as Harpreet went over, the large item collections updated from 20 to 30. The lake containers set out would be a $50 fee. The container replacement fee would be updated from 25 to 50 to update to actually reflect the actual cost of replacement. The dumpster replacement request would be $150. That in both of these requests, neither one would be normal wear and tear. It would be something aesthetic or something along those lines that someone just wanted it exchanged. The inaccessible dumpster fee would be $100. The extra commercial collection would go from 45 or 55 to 100. The paint recycling fee would be $3 per gallon, and then we would enforce the 2 cubic yard placement for the yard waste. Business plan initiatives, same as we talked about the last time. Nothing changed there. So those are the updates that we had.
Answer any questions?
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So great job and recap. So thank you for walking through this again. And really, actually, you've already answered all my questions. So my questions and comments are actually more to council. So basically, as we discussed last time, I of course have the goal. I want to make sure it's easy for Roswell residents to recycle as much as possible. And frankly, long-term, would love the opportunity to make it sustainable and making sure that Roswell residents aren't subsidizing other cities, but the opportunity to allow others there to recycle as long as it's not costing Roswell residents money. So this is important to me. That being said, as this council, as you looked through these updates that staff has proposed, I do ask that if you have any hesitation, any concerns, please raise them, because I do want to make sure to really collaborate with all of you on this. As staff walked me through it, it seemed like everything was reasonable and rare, et cetera, and they had a lot of different explanations on why they came up with the numbers they came up with. But that being said, it's most important to me that all of you are feeling comfortable. So if any of you have any any recommended updates or questions or anything like that. I want to make sure we hash that out, and whatever we decide, would love to see a unanimous update to make sure that we're supporting our EPW staff and making sure our recycle center is sustainable for all Roswell residents.
Thank you, Councilmember Palermo. And I've never known this council to be shy or as far as recommending things and voicing their opinions. So Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So, good. So I have a few questions. So are we still be accepting non-residents?
No, sir, we are not.
Okay.
We are not.
We're not. So these fees will be only for Roswell residents?
That is correct.
Okay. And there's any possibility, or have you studied the possibility to accept non-residents and a much premium fees that might even be helping us to offset some of the extra costs that is, like you explained, you know, the plastic, the China accepting less recyclables, et cetera. That will be something that will make sense, charging premium, much premium to non-residents.
I believe, sir, that we will continue to explore options. The first option we're trying to explore is addressing ourselves to cities themselves to see if they would like to participate. We've started that conversation with some of the sister cities. If none of that comes to fruition, we can continue to look for other opportunities to generate revenue for the recycling center, but we wanted to make sure that it's fair, obviously, and that it makes sense, that to council members Palermo's point, we're trying not to subsidize, obviously, the other cities. So I think the place we want to start first is with a memorandum of agreement or an IGA of some sort with one of the other cities to see if they'd like to participate, and there is some interest.
Okay. Assuming that we have extra capacity today that we can absorb more recycled product. So my other point was something I'm very passionate about, the paint recycling. You know, I enjoy very much, and you know, I always try to participate twice a year, putting together in my basement, and then twice a year or once a year goes to give those at the recycle center. And you know, every time that I go, it's a huge line there. So it's not only me, fanatic of recycling paint, but seems like a lot of people in Roswell like to recycle paint, and they might even make an effort to collect through the months extra and then go once or twice a year to bring all this. So the $3, I mean, a couple of things. The $3 fee will apply for the semi-annual paint collection, or will be still free semi-annual, and then residents just pay $3 a gallon out of the twice a year organized recycling events.
So the hazardous waste, the household hazardous waste event is, I think, what you're referring to, and that's when we take the oil-based paints, am I right, Nick? And those will remain free to residents twice a year. It's the latex paint, which basically can be dried and can be safely disposed in your garbage container and landfilled, that we are now we're asking to charge for up to a gallon, $3 per can. And that is to simply offset what we're paying to have that recycled. We're spending $30,000 to $50,000 annually to pay to have that material picked up and taken and turned into recycled paint. And the reason it's so expensive, and Dan had gotten into this a little bit at committee, was that there's just not much of a market for that material. And it's just been it's been a large expense for the recycling center. So we looked at what are those large expenses that we can address ourselves to, and that was one of the biggest.
Okay, so if I understood correctly, then latex, you can leave the can open for X number of days or months, will dry, and then you put in the regular garbage, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, I don't think that we want to put this when it's not dry, because we don't want the garbage truck all over the road, leaving a yellow paint or whatever paint on the road. That would be a disaster. So, you know, I like the idea, but we have to make a lot of education, I guess, that you need to dry the latex before you put in a garbage can, before pick up by a regular truck.
And you're absolutely right. One of the biggest recommendations coming out of this plan is a more rigorous, assertive public education campaign for all things recycling, to your point, the latex paint, people need to understand how to dispose of it properly if they don't want to come and pay the $3 a can, which some people won't.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Additional comments, questions from council? Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? Yes, ma'am, please come forward.
Thank you. My name is Janet Russell, and I started the Recycling Center with Kathy Schechter. Never underestimate the power of two women who are committed to a cause. As far as recycling goes, I agree. I think we need to be charging other cities or have them partner. It's too much. When we started that, it was in an old reused gas station, and people would drive up and we'd pick stuff up out of the car. Roswell has grown, so has the trash. Everybody has everything delivered now. I don't. I've never bought from Amazon, nor will I ever buy from Amazon. I have nothing delivered to my house. So I do want to let you know that that 50% increase in garbage collection rates, I find a personal affront since I have 1 can a month. Years ago, I advocated for pay-as-you-throw. Other cities do it. You fill a garbage bag, you get tags, that you pay for those tags. Why should I pay the same amount for my garbage collection as the neighbor next door that gets every single thing delivered with cardboard boxes all day, every day in my neighborhood? That said, as far as paint goes, paint, latex, dried, I disagree with you when you say it doesn't hurt going in a landfill. Yes, it does hurt going into a landfill. I remind you, the earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth. And if you don't think that that will penetrate into a landfill, I'm no scientist, but I can assure you that it will. That is why I proposed, and Mr. Pizzullo is very excited about the idea of a program that I know about for recycling and reusing paint. They combine paints, latex or oil-based, and then they are sent to developing countries. For example, after the earthquake in Haiti, when they needed paint desperately, Roni Delgard started the paint project, and they took the paint to Haiti to protect the wood and the construction projects. Mr. Pizzullo is very excited about the idea. I've put him in contact with information about the project, and I would hope that the city would be proactive and not need 14 consultants and 3 committees to make a decision, because we're really good at that. Education is absolutely essential, and I would suggest that you tell realtors every time they close a deal that they hand the new owner of the apartment or the condo or the home what we do here in Roswell for recycling, because many places that they come from, they don't have mandatory recycling at the curb. They are clueless. I tell people all the time, yes, we take plastic, paper, glass, blah, 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 blah. Really, I didn't know that. I tell them where the recycling center is. Our children are the future. We need to educate them. We have many children who live in apartments who have no way to get anything to a recycling center because the parents don't own a car. We need to be taking our recycling containers to apartment complexes once a month so that children, the future generation, because in 50 years, no one in this room is going to be alive. But we're going to leave the world and the earth behind. And I hope Roswell will stay clean and pretty. But we have to teach the children. So I would hope that the city would get a little bit creative and proactive about recycling. For those of us that have always, I've never knowingly thrown away an aluminum can in my life, nor a bottle. I've carried them home from parties. Why? Because that's my personal responsibility to keep this world clean for the next generation. I would hope you would all assume that same responsibility and pass it on to the next generations. It's not just lip service, it's action. The guys that work at our recycling center are fantastic. They are so nice. They're patient. Good God, they're patient. I held on to spray paint cans for a year this year because of COVID, because they didn't have the event one time, and so it was like a nightmare. There was a line of cars around the corner of the recycling center to take the cans, but they're not going in a landfill. So I would recommend to each of you to take a personal responsibility for education to the general public, to our restaurants, to our visitors. Why don't we have a recycling bin at every park that says cans, glass, trash, instead of just one can that the poor guys have to then, all those plastic bottles that are down at the river and the cans and the bottles. Here we have these beautiful world-class parks and we're telling people, just put it all in one can, we don't give a damn. It's a mixed message. Please, get creative, get proactive, for God's sake. We don't have much left in this world.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to come forward and speak? Seeing no one approach, do we have a motion? Councilmember Palermo.
So I just have a couple questions before motion. So this program, I guess I'm just curious from staff, do you feel there's any other options for recycling paint besides the one that costs us $3 per can? Do you feel there's any other possible ways to reduce that cost for residents? Or do you feel from everything you've looked at, it ends up, no matter what, it's going to end up costing $3 per can to recycle?
I definitely don't mind answering that question. I think that if we continue to take paint at the recycling center, we need to recoup that cost per gallon. We're always open to looking at other avenues to recycle all of our recyclables, and the paint is a program that I'm definitely going to be checking out, and if there's a way for us to save money for the residents, we're going to do that.
Okay, excellent, because that's something definitely, and I don't need to add it to my motion, because as liaison, I can certainly just continue this conversation, but it is important to me that we always are looking for reducing costs, and also making it easier for residents to recycle. So that's one question answered. Definitely some great points I heard about personal responsibility, and I think that is really relevant and really important. And actually, I guess another point that was brought up, and I have a question on. So we have, in the city of Roswell, every single-family home or townhome, to my understanding, gets a trash can and a recycle can. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then I believe there are apartment complexes where they certainly get the trash dumpster.
Most multifamily are not on the city's solid waste plan.
Oh, most multifamily are not. Okay, gotcha, okay. And then I guess that answers it. So they're just basically finding their own private provider?
Provider, yes, sir.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, then I guess that answers my other question. And so thank you for answering all my questions. As always, great job. And with that, I motion.
Excuse me, Councilmember Palermo, since you opened up for discussion, I'll ask if other council members have questions before I entertain a motion. Comments, questions? Councilmember Palermo.
Excellent, thank you. Motion to approve item number 5, approval of an update to the solid waste business plan.
Got a motion and a second by Councilmember Wilsey. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Thank you. Now we are on to Councilmember Judy in Public Safety Department.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 6, approval of text amendment to Chapter 8, Health and Public Safety, Article 8.7, Air Pollution Control, Section 8.7.4, prohibit acts by deleting Section 8.7.3, open burning, and creating a new Section 8.3.19, open burning of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Roswell. This is the first reading.
Mr. Davidson.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend Chapter 8, Health and Public Safety, Article 8.7, Air Pollution Control, Section 8.7.4, Prohibited Acts, by deleting Section 8.7.3, Open Burning, and creating a new Section 8.3.19, Open Burning of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Roswell. Now therefore, the Mayor and Council of the City of Roswell, pursuant to their authority, do hereby adopt the following amendment, the text of which is incorporated herein by reference, and if approved, this will be the first reading.
Gentlemen, please present.
You want me to read the whole thing to you?
No.
Okay.
General
Our proposal
presentation.
is to update the open burning ordinance by adding the state law into the ordinance. Components of the state law will allow us any cases to be adjudicated in a municipal court, and it also makes the state law more restrictive. Some of the items that are in there that we've changed are the fire department permit can be gotten to exceed portions of the open burn ordinance if they want to have a fire that's greater than 3 feet, or if they wanted to have more than one fire per address, they could get a permit. This permitting process is basically to help organizations, nonprofit organizations, schools that want to have a pep rally or something like that, where we would identify any problems with that site prior to them having their event, and we would recommend either what type of fire protection they have to have on hand or any other provisions they would have to have. This will also restrict burning within 25 feet of a structure and within 25 feet of the property line. This is a component of the International Fire Code that was added to the ordinance. There was one section there about disposal of explosive packages. That's under the Department of Labor. That's their law. They have to dispose of explosive packaging by burning it. And they would do that on site. So if we had somebody doing blasting on a property to clear rock, then they would burn that right there, and that would permit them to do that. And it also says that attendance, cooking fires, recreational fires, and use of portable outdoor fireplaces shall be attended until the fire is completely extinguished. And it provides for extinguishing devices or garden hoses that have to be present for the purpose of extinguishing. That's the highlight of the ordinance.
Thank you. Does council have any questions? Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. Thank you. I just had a few questions after the presentation last time. I did a little research. I went onto the Georgia State website, and I guess it's the EPD division that talks about the open burns and the burning. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in the state, I wasn't able to find any specifics that related to 25 feet or specific distances that were addressed here. So my first question is that part of the state, or is that what you're getting out of the International Fire Code?
It's out of the International Fire Code, which has been adopted by the state fire marshal, and the city of Roswell has adopted the International Fire Code.
Okay, but it's not a state law, or it's not anywhere in the state law about
By adoption by the state fire marshal, it has become state law. Is that correct, Charlie?
I just wanted to follow up on that because I called a state senator who was active in the fire department to ask these questions because I couldn't find it in the state anywhere. So that's why I just wanted to clarify that. And then also on the International Fire Code, and perhaps I don't have the most current version, it talks about fires in approved containers that are not less than 15 feet versus just doing a blanket 25 feet. And there's other things in the International Fire Code that are adopted. I mean, they are headquartered out of Europe or Belgium, I understand, but Germany, for example, isn't allowing any gas grills. So I'm just concerned about just blanketly looking at an International Fire Code and adopting that.
That's a fire marshal question. You want to answer it, Charlie?
If I'm understanding this correctly, are you wanting to know why we don't just adopt it as is? The International Fire Code?
So my question is, we've picked one part of it, and the International Fire Code has lots of things, like one of them in section the exceptions under, well, it's all under section 307, under 307.4, fires in approved containers are permitted to 15 feet from a structure, and that,
Yes, ma'am. So what we've done is we've taken the restrictions, for instance, the bonfires. We don't permit bonfires in the city of Roswell, so we've made the ordinance a little bit more restrictive than the International Fire Code. It also is in conjunction with some of the other municipalities, Alpharetta, Milton, and Cobb County also have a lot of the same requirements as we're putting in our ordinance. So they're standard in the area.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you. So, let me see if I understand correctly. The state already have legislation, the state, and they take in consideration the International Fire Code. So what are we mirroring, something that the state is legislating? So, you know, what are we doing this instead of just, I understand that, you know, public safety can enforce state laws, I believe. So why are we doing this pretty much?
We're updating a very old ordinance and making the requirements more restrictive than the International Fire Code currently has. If that answered your question.
Yeah, and the reason is of doing this?
The current ordinance was adopted 25 or so years ago, and it's very vague and outdated, and I believe it needs to be updated to be more restrictive than the International Fire Code and not as vague, so when our firefighters go out to investigate a possible illegal burn, they have the information that they can give out to the residents so that it's very precise.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Additional comments, questions from council? Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So really, my thought process is ultimately, under the Gold Dome, the state of Georgia, they pass many laws, and I have no say in that. And they certainly pass a number of laws that I disagree with. And now what we're talking about is basically passing a Roswell law that frankly has something that I disagree with, and I'm not going to be able to support. Because really, what this is doing is I looked at the UDC on rear setbacks, and so the rear setback minimum under RS 30, which means basically if you have an acre lot, then chances are you have an RS 30. So an acre lot would be required to have a minimum rear setback of 40 feet. And so if you're required to have your fire pit 25 feet back from the structure and 25 feet from the rear property line, it's basically saying that's actually not a big enough property to have a fire pit. You really have to go up to having the RS 87, which is 2 acres. And then but in reality, some different properties have some different sizes despite the zoning. So if RS 30, meaning the acre lots, aren't allowed to have fire pits anymore, then certainly when you're talking about a half an acre, which is like the RS 18, or you're talking a third of an acre, which is the RS 12, so some very common zoning types in the city of Roswell, we are banning fire pits. And we're going to not only do that, but we're going to have a law that says basically anybody that has less than an acre property that has a fire pit is potentially going to face up to $1,000 fine each time they use that fire pit. I strongly believe that Roswell residents, as long as they're using a fire pit that's safe with the right size, I feel they should have the right to have a fire pit in their backyard. And I'm not willing to say that I support them getting a $1,000 fine because they have less than an acre and they want to have a fire pit. So for that reason, I'm not going to be able to support this tonight.
Councilmember Judy.
Mr. Davison, because it is state law, as of right now, no matter if Roswell updates the code tonight to put this in, a resident is not allowed to do what Councilman Palermo just said anyway.
Is the 25 feet state law right now?
It is, excuse me, it is for that size fire.
Then that's correct. They wouldn't be able to do it right now anyway.
So what we're doing for transparency's sake is updating our code to reflect the state law that citizens cannot break anyway, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so I don't want to put something out there that is illegal and just overlook it because we don't like it and we don't like the law. The citizens of Roswell should know what the law is, and if that law should be reflected in our burn notice and burn code if it is state law. And that's what y'all are telling me, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Let me ask a question because I am becoming confused. The first time we talked about this, I thought that when it was initiated, I thought you were saying that this directly reflects state law. But the questions that Councilmember Hall asked did not indicate that, and your answers indicated that no, some of it's not state law, we're making it more restrictive. So what's state law and what isn't? Can you just?
We would have to have both the ordinance and the International Fire Code here and separate that for you. For instance, like I brought up before, the bonfires are permitted in the International Fire Code, 50 feet from a property line, 50 feet from a structure. We do not allow bonfires in the city of Roswell in the current ordinance or the new ordinance that we're proposing. The maximum size fire in the city of Roswell for recreation is 3 feet across. That's current. There's no difference between what we're proposing as far as the size of the fire that's in the current ordinance as opposed to the proposed one. The biggest differences, as Chief Papadis was saying, is the 25 feet to the structures, 25 feet to the property line. We've gotten many, many complaints about recreational fires right up against people's fences, right on their property lines. So that was one of the reasons we incorporated that into this proposed ordinance. One of the things that's not in our current ordinance is to currently to have someone there at the fire at all times until it's extinguished. I believe that's very important. That was added to the proposed ordinance. That is not in our current ordinance and is in the International Fire Code.
Okay, that was just as clear as mud.
Oh.
But I would like to suggest before, I've got two hands up down here, but I would like to suggest that perhaps we defer this first reading until we can get clarification on state law, Roswell law, international law, because my personal feeling is, these fire pits, I can tell you they weren't even around 10, 15 years ago. But now, HGTV's got them in every single house that they're showcasing, and people are doing them at home. I know of employees that have built fire pits in their backyard. So my question, and I'll let you all speak just 1 second, is I think we need to get some clarification because the times they are a-changing, and, if we've got an antiquated ordinance that's not perhaps dealing with what has become commonplace, then we've got a problem. Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and for those comments and for all the explanation that you've provided. I guess when I'm reading this, and maybe there's just some confusion, it sounds like it is this would apply to more temporary structures. It says pit, barbecue, or portable outdoor fireplace. But I'm just curious if it does apply to a permanent, say a stone pit or a stone outdoor fireplace. Does it apply to those as well? And if it does, then how does our UDC or how does our building permitting code apply to those structures?
Most of the commercially available fire pits or cauldrons or whatever you want to talk about, if you look at those, they're pretty much all 3 feet in diameter. None of them are over 3 feet. Some of them are manufactured to a standard that might have a UL rating on them.
Right.
We're allowing those fire pits, cauldrons, we're allowing if you make a fire pit out of brick,
Right.
that's permissible as long as it doesn't exceed 3 feet. What we would not allow would be a fire that is not in some type of pit or cauldron just on the ground. That would not be allowed. There has to be some barrier around it. The purpose for that is so that if you get embers or wind blows, it doesn't spread out the way the wind is blowing, so you can sort of contain it. And one of the things I like to go back to Councilman Hall's statement. Could we get the code section that you're looking at? Because codes are very intricate, and it may say one thing here, it may say something different here, and it's two different subjects. So we would like to have that code section so we could look at that, and then we can get back to you with a definite answer.
I mean, I think, sorry, can I speak? If what you are describing is allowed, then I think that helps address some of the concerns. Maybe not.
It's still required to be 25 feet from the structure.
It still has to be 25
Right,
feet.
and the property line, yes.
Okay.
Even whether it's
Right.
built at home or whether it's purchased at Home Depot,
Right,
it has to be
right, sure.
25 feet.
Okay, I'd be curious how we're handling that through permitting, so, because I know they are included in landscaping plans all the time.
I don't believe they're
So.
looked at through our code enforcement.
Right, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Judy.
Thank you, Mayor. So I was under the impression that we were just putting state law in and making it very clear for the citizens that they know what the law is. And I support that all day long. I don't support not putting a law in that is the law. But I would support a deferral tonight to clarify what is, what isn't, and that way we know when we come back in here what the citizens know. Citizens know this is state law, and we are just marrying that. So what I took in the last meeting was that this allows our firefighters and people to go out and say, hey, look, this is not only state law, it's in our code of ordinances of Roswell, and it makes it very clear and transparent for the citizens that they're either following law or breaking law. I don't like the law either. I have a fire pit. I like fire pits. But at the end of the day, you can't just overlook a state law because you don't like it. It needs to be in our code of ordinance so we know what we're following. So that's my take, but I will, when we're ready, say an motion for a deferral this evening.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So, yeah, because I guess what was unclear to me too, you mentioned there have been some complaints from some people putting a fire pit right at the property line, and you said that was part of why that was put in here. But it's still, you're saying it definitely is still a state law, and it was not the complaints that was really the only reason driving it. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, sir. That is part of the International Fire Code, the 25 feet, if the fire pit is not more than 3 feet across.
Well, no, I guess so the way I'm reading this, so I guess to Councilmember Wilsey's point, I'll try to get some clarification as well. The way I was reading this is it has to be in a pit, which there's a lot of different definitions of a pit, or a barbecue or a portable. So that's one. It has to do that. No confusion there. Makes perfect sense. You're saying it cannot be on the ground. So that's totally clear to me. And the fact that that's probably always been a rule. Number two, the fact that it can not be more than 3 feet across. No surprise there. I know that's always been the rule. Probably same. I didn't know about 2 feet high, but that makes sense. That's always been the rule. But it's my understanding, even if it's in a pit that's not more than 3 feet, that is no more than 2 feet high, it's still not allowed to be within 25 feet of the back of the house and 25 feet from the property line, if this passes, right? And then, so I guess a question for Mr. Davidson. Under F violations, it shows that the penalty for each time someone, that basically, again, based on the UDC, anybody that has less than an acre has the potential of being in violation of this, in which case it says the fine shall not be less than $50 nor more than $1,000. Does this city council get to control those numbers, or would this city council be breaking the law if the city council chose to reduce those numbers?
So basically, it would be up to the judge to determine the fine.
No,
If you wanted to lower the amount, you could do that.
Okay,
the
so
minimum.
Right, and so thank you for answering my question. So even though this is mirroring a state law, this council does have a decision to make on what should be the penalty. And again, I don't think it should be illegal for someone on less than an acre property to get to have a safe fire pit that follows the other rules. And so to say that there's even the potential that they could get $1,000 fine is something that I think is definitely not right for the residents of Roswell. I think even $50 is steep because, again, they've clearly been doing it for, the Roswell residents have clearly had fire pits in a backyard for a long time. And again, many would not have, this size property, in which case, again, I'd rather see this not pass because of this one section. But if this one section does pass, what I really hope is the violation will be edited and it will be a much more reasonable violation than the potential of $1,000 fine for having a fire pit in a backyard.
Additional comments, questions? Yes, Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So if this pretty much is mirroring the state law that have to be obeyed, what's the difference to bring to the resident a copy of the state law versus bringing a copy of the Roswell ordinance? I mean, what is the difference? It's a law, and we all have to obey state law first. So I don't understand the difference. Why do we need to start mirroring every single state law into local law just to mirror and just to bring a copy that have the logo of Roswell and doesn't have a Roswell of the state of Georgia? So I don't understand this, and so then it's going to be hard to support this. And so then my next question would be, if we deny this, can this item brought back to committee meeting and start a process again? Because I think that this needs to start. If someone wants to move this forward, have to be from committee again back all the way down and move it up again if they support. But so I don't know, if we deny today, then the next time could come to committee meeting instead of the mayor and council meeting. That is a question. If we deny today, can this item brought back again through committee meeting and move it up eventually if they support to mayor and council meeting?
Mr. Davidson.
You could defer it and request that it come back to a committee and that it not come back to council for the first reading until it's been to committee, if you wanted to do that.
And if we deny this tonight, this could be brought back again in the future if there is enough support?
If you deny it tonight, it can come back whenever you want it to come back.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? Yes, ma'am.
Apostle. It's nice not to be like on Hollywood Squares with the Zoom meetings. One thing I don't think anybody's thought about is I have a little fire pit in my front yard because a lot of people are needing the comfort of seeing their neighbors walking by during this pandemic, so they've created little conversation units in the front yards instead of a front porch. I don't sit on an acre of land. I sit on a quarter of an acre of land, and the back of my house is all woods, so I couldn't put anything back there anyway. However, what about the restaurants, for example, on Canton Street that all have a fire pit in the front or in the side? I'm thinking Plum Street. Everybody gathers around it. Those are not 25 feet from a structure, nor are they 25 feet from a property line. What are you going to do with them? Are you going to find those restaurants? You're going to send them? I mean, my God, everybody talks about them like they're the cash cow of the city. You're worried about finding them more parking, but you're ready to take away their fire pits, and everybody loves those. I do. Takes us back to our caveman days when we all lived around a fire. It's all it is. However, think about it. I don't understand the 25 feet, the 50 feet. I know the 3 feet, yeah. Some men that who rent a house down the street from me started an open fire, and the firemen had to show up because all the trees caught on fire 4 weeks ago. Yes, behind an old house that backs up to a shopping center right on Highway 9. So they didn't give a damn. They just started burning stuff. Then they did it again. So I went to the firemen and firehouse and told them, you guys need to stop, go tell them what the rules are. You can't just have an open fire. We all know that, but they didn't care. So I think you need to think about the repercussions of this 25 feet, 50 feet, 3 feet. I don't know. We all know you shouldn't have an open fire, a burn. But I think you're starting to realize, I don't know, do you think everybody lives on acres in mansions? No. And in fact, we're seeing the lots get smaller and smaller and smaller, right? You're all responsible for that. You allow it. So I think you better think about the repercussions because, you know, the unintended consequences of your decisions really do happen.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to come forward and speak? I don't see any hands up. Additional comments, questions from council? Do I have a motion?
Yes, Mayor. I do agree with Councilman Palermo and looking at the fees. So therefore, I think it's a little more complex than just coming back to council on this. So I'll defer this back to committee, the next Public Safety Committee. And hopefully then we'll know definitely what's state law, what's international fire code, and I also, with Roswell adopting the International Fire Code with the state of Georgia, what we can change and what we can't change would be helpful. So based on the conversation tonight, that's my motion to defer back to first Public Safety Committee.
We've got a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Tizer. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Thank you. Back to you, Councilmember Judy.
Thank you, Mayor. Number 7, approval for the mayor and/or city administrator to sign a contract agreement with Central Square Technologies for use of their Cry Wolf false alarm management software.
Can't tell you how many times I've done that myself. Good evening, Mayor Henry and council members. So this is the request to sign an agreement with Central Square Technologies to administer the Cry Wolf alarm program in accordance with the City of Roswell's new alarm ordinance and resolution of fees that was passed last month. To quickly put it in perspective, again, in 2019, Roswell Police Department received 7,735 alarm calls. 97.72% of them were false. The fire department, 1,167 alarm calls, and 98.54% of them were false. We are looking to preserve public safety, preserve resources rather, improve public safety, And CryWolf provides a complete turnkey service managing the false alarm program. Clients have received about a 70% reduction in false alarms on average, and about an 87% rate on collection fees. At the last council meeting, I was asked to bring back a few stats, and I really do want to make it clear that this is a complete and total 200% estimate or guesstimate, if you will, because there is no way to actually provide an exact number for you. But Councilmember Palermo, you asked me about how much revenue we would anticipate to collect. And so the anticipation, again, a guesstimate in the first year is to receive approximately, that the city would receive approximately $170,000 in the first year. That was from CryWolf themselves, based upon the information that we provided them on the amount of alarms that we have received in the past and the amount of false alarms that we've received in the past. There's no way to give you an accurate account simply because we do not track the amount of alarm users in the city right now. So this would improve all of that. The other question that we were asked last month to bring to council tonight was about the percentage rate that CryWolf is receiving, which is 26%. And again, the revenue share percentage is calculated based on a variety of factors, namely the quantity of false alarms, quantity of registrations and renewals, and an agency's fee and fine schedule. The factors vary from agency to agency, of course, and based on the factors, CryWolf analyzes the amount of tasks, which is basically the level of effort that they themselves, Central Square, will perform to fully support the alarm ordinance enforcement for the city, including processing permit registration and renewals, generating correspondences and invoices, assisting with appeals and waivers, account reconciliation, and answering inquiries from the citizens and businesses. So Mr. Luckett was able to help us give, again, a guesstimate and anticipate in the first year, again, because the goal is to improve education and reduce the amount of alarms completely. So the total revenue estimation is $229,000, of which $59,000 will be the vendor share, to the city receiving about $170,000. So I'm open for questions.
Questions from council? Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I was just doing the calculation here, and seems like this contract is for, according with the estimated given today, that's $60,000 contract. So, you know, I understand that last time we discussed about the, you know, how many vendors out there providing the service, and we talk about the cost of implementation of a new module from a new vendor of a similar software, but, you know, the value was never given. You know, we say it's more money, but what is more money? And what is gonna cost the service? Because if you have to pay more, but then doesn't cost you $60,000 a year, maybe that might make sense to pay for the implementation of a different module from a different vendor that provide the same software. So, you know, I don't see this complete information on the process and you know, the different vendors, why yes, why no, with numbers. We just find out about the $230,000 total revenues. $170,000 will go for the city, $60,000 will go to straight to the vendor, who also, which I don't like and I don't agree, they're getting also, I understand that they're getting 26%, not only of the false alarm fees, but also from the alarm permits. So, which is a, you know, that is a fixed cost, the alarm permits. That the false alarms is variable because depends on how many alarms, false alarms are in a year. So, you know, I don't like the idea of having to also share the fixed cost of the alarm permit. 26% will go to them. So this means that we have 0 false alarms in a year. They still get 26% of the alarm permits. So for this reason, it's going to be hard to support this. Plus, I would like to know, is any state, you know, we just talked about state legislation on the previous item. Is there any state legislation regarding the false alarms at the state level?
So I'm sorry. So your question, is there any state legislation regarding false alarms?
Correct.
So there are, but they're not fee-related.
Okay. So there is legislation currently in place?
The current legislation that's in place in the state is that alarm monitoring companies must attempt 2 phone calls before notifying a 911 PSAP about an alarm.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions, Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. On a similar thing, I had actually heard from a resident about a bill. It sounds like you might already be aware of it. So I'd heard just really the potential of a bill that does impact this. And so I just did actually a quick search, and I'm seeing actually April 26th, 2021 in the AJC. And the article is, or the author is from the AJC. It says, Georgia cities rethink their false alarm laws in wake of a bill. Recently passed legislation prohibits fining installers for false alarms suffered by customers. So that one, would that potentially be, how would that work, I guess?
I don't want to interrupt you, Councilmember Palermo, but I believe Mr. Davidson can provide information on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that law basically said that cities couldn't charge the alarm company. That's not what our ordinance does.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So that's helpful with that. Okay, so basically, that's because they were, so Sandy Springs and Brookhaven, they were billing the alarm company, and we are gonna bill the customer. So the customer uses an alarm company, okay. And I guess that makes sense because it says fining installers. So that is helpful. And then I guess as I kind of register this information, because as I had brought up last time was, I think it was at committee, I brought up that the way I read the contract, the first 2 years would be bad for the city to early terminate because there'd be, in my opinion, potentially significant costs, whereas in after 2 years, there would be insignificant costs. And so I just want to make sure that if we're entering in, that we're confident and believe that for a 2-year period, it's in the best interest in the city as well as the best interest for Roswell businesses and Roswell residents.
Additional comments from council? Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? Seeing no hands up, additional comments, questions from council before I entertain a motion? Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve item number 7.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Judy. Do I have a second? Second by Councilmember Wilsey. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it is Councilmember Hall, Tizer, Wilsey, Palermo, and Judy. All those opposed? Councilmember Zapata. The motion carries. We are adjourned.